There is a moment near the end of Avengers Endgame, after the portals have opened and the dust of the snap has reversed itself across the battlefield, where the camera pulls back and shows every hero the franchise has ever introduced standing in a single ragged line on the wreckage of the Avengers compound. Captain America is at the front, his shield broken and remade. Behind him are sorcerers and warriors, soldiers and scientists, gods and ordinary people in extraordinary suits. The portals are still glowing in the air. Doctor Strange has just opened doorways across the universe. Wakanda has emptied itself onto the battlefield. The Ravagers are descending in their ships, and somewhere in the noise, a woman who can rewrite the rules of physics is walking forward to crush a man who has just murdered half of all life. And the question the moment refuses to answer, the question the entire franchise has been quietly asking for over a decade, is this. Of all these people standing in that line, who is actually the most powerful? Not the most popular, not the most beloved, not the one with the biggest marketing campaign, or the loudest theme music, or the most lines in the script. The most powerful, measured by what they can actually do when you take the costume off and look at the raw capability underneath. Because the Marvel Cinematic Universe has spent 23 films and a growing pile of streaming shows assembling a roster of heroes whose abilities range from a man with a bow and a quiver of trick arrows to a woman whose hands can dismantle a thinking computer with a flick of red light. And the gap between the bottom of that ranking and the top is so wide that the word Avenger almost stops being a useful category at all. That is what this video is about. A complete ranking, from the weakest to the strongest, of every Avenger the films and the connected series have given us. The list is going to start small. It is going to start with people whose only superpower is that they are very good at being themselves. And then it is going to climb. The abilities will get stranger. The implications will get heavier. By the time the list reaches the top, the entries will no longer be talking about strength in any conventional sense. They will be talking about beings who can break the floor of reality and put it back together a different way. And once you really look at what some of these people can do, the idea of them all belonging to the same team begins to feel less like a hopeful image of unity and more like a fragile negotiated truce between forces that probably should never have been gathered in one room. Settle in, get comfortable, let the lights go low. This one runs long, and the only thing you have to do is listen as the line on that battlefield gets put back in order, one quiet name at a time. Let us get into it. The bottom of this ranking belongs to a man with a bow. That sentence, read aloud, should already do something to you. Because in a universe that contains a thunder god and a sentient computer made of cosmic energy, the fact that one of the founding members of the Avengers fights crime with a recurved compound bow and a quiver of arrows is not a small detail. It is the entire thesis of the character. Clint Barton, Hawkeye, is a man whose superpower is that he is very, very good at hitting things he points at. That is it. That is the whole list. In The Avengers, released in May of 2012, Clint Barton is introduced as a SHIELD agent on guard duty at a remote research facility in the desert. He spends his first scene perched in the rafters watching Loki step through the Tesseract portal, and then he spends the rest of the first act of the film under Loki's mind control, hunting down his own teammates. The film treats this almost casually. He is the asset Loki turns into a weapon, and the weapon happens to be extremely effective. He helps Loki escape custody, leads an attack on a SHIELD helicarrier, and very nearly succeeds in bringing the entire operation down from inside. When Natasha finally breaks the spell by hitting him in the head, the film cuts to him sitting on a medical cot, looking at her, and asking how many agents he killed. She does not answer. That moment is the show, in miniature, telling you who this character actually is. Hawkeye is not the most powerful Avenger. He is barely even the most powerful person in any room he walks into. What he is the Avenger who keeps account. Every other member of the team eventually causes catastrophic collateral damage at some point in the franchise and finds a way to live with it. Clint Barton is the one who cannot, the one who keeps the list. The one who, in Avengers Age of Ultron, takes the team to a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere because his wife and 3 children live there, and he has somehow managed to keep them entirely hidden from the world's intelligence services, from Tony Stark's surveillance, from everyone except Natasha. That farmhouse is the show telling you, without underlining it, that the weakest Avenger in pure power terms is also the only one who has built a life outside of being an Avenger. And that life is the thing he has the most to lose. His power set, in the strict mechanical sense, is small. He has training, years of it. He is a former carnival performer in the comics and a special forces operator in the films, and he carries the muscle memory of someone who has done the same precise physical action 10,000 times. He uses a recurved compound bow, often with a quiver of specialty arrows whose tips can release small explosive charges, electrical pulses, grappling lines, smoke, and on one memorable occasion, in Avengers Endgame, a PIM particle payload that briefly turns a van into a toy. His accuracy is uncanny, presented in the films as something close to a sixth sense. In Age of Ultron, there is a moment where he fires 3 arrows in rapid succession without looking, each one finding a different moving target across 100 yards of open ground, and the show does not slow down to admire it. It just lets him do it and moves on. The implication is that this is normal. This is the floor of what he is capable of. But none of this makes him powerful, not in the sense this list is using the word. A single Chitauri infantry rifle can pierce his body armor. A single Outrider can tear him apart. He has, on multiple occasions across the franchise, been saved by the timely arrival of a teammate whose power output is on a completely different scale. And the show is aware of this. There is a scene in the climactic battle of Avengers Endgame where Hawkeye is running through a collapsing cavern carrying the gauntlet that holds the Infinity Stones, and he stops, realizes he is surrounded, and accepts that he is going to die. He does not panic. He does not try to fight his way out. He just sets his jaw and looks for somewhere to put the gauntlet down. And then T'Challa walks out of a portal and asks him to hand it over, and the moment passes. That sequence is not a celebration of Hawkeye's power. It is an acknowledgement of his limits. The most dangerous object in the universe is in his hands, and he needs other people to keep him alive long enough to do anything with it. What earns him his place on this list, what makes him an Avenger at all, is a different kind of measurement. His Hawkeye solo series, released on Disney Plus in November of 2021, builds an entire 6-episode arc around the consequences of his time as Ronin, the masked killer he became during the 5 years after the snap, when his family was dust and he saw no reason to keep being Clint Barton. The Ronin arc is not introduced in that series. It happens in Endgame, briefly, in a sequence in Tokyo where Natasha finds him in an alley after he has just murdered a Yakuza enforcer with a katana. The man on his knees in the rain begs for his life. Clint kills him without hesitation. Natasha tells him that what he is doing is not going to bring his family back. He tells her, essentially, that he does not care. The grief has hollowed him out, and what is left is a man who has decided that the world does not deserve survivors, when his children did not get to be among them. This is the part of Hawkeye that the rest of the franchise tends to soften. The Avengers movies present him as the family man, the wisecracking marksman, the guy who carries the team when they need a steady hand. But the Disney Plus series sits inside the grief. It introduces Maya Lopez, who is going to become Echo, and it gives her a perfectly clean reason to want him dead. It introduces Kate Bishop, who is going to be his successor, and it makes her watch him explain that the work has cost him things she does not yet understand. There is a scene late in that series where he sits in a diner with Kate and tries to articulate why he keeps doing this. And the closest he comes is to say that there are some people who can save the world, and there are some people who can keep the people who save the world alive, and he has spent his entire career being the second kind. That is not a man explaining his superpower. That is a man explaining his function. And his function is what places him here. Not at the bottom because he is useless. At the bottom because in a literal measurement of force output, he is a baseline human being, and every other entry on this list is going to outclass him by orders of magnitude. The show knows this. He knows this. The films lean into it as a feature rather than a flaw. In The Avengers, after the Battle of New York, Tony Stark and Steve Rogers and Thor are processing the scale of what just happened, and Clint is sitting on a piece of rubble, eating shawarma, like a man who has finished a long shift. He does not need to perform. He does not need to flex. He hit what he aimed at. The city is still standing, and he gets to go home to his wife. That is the whole story. That is also why he is on the list at all. Because the show is telling you, by including him in the line on that battlefield in Endgame, that being the weakest person in the room is not the same thing as being the least necessary. The team does not function without him. The team also barely notices him. Both things are true, and the gap between them is what makes him the perfect entry to begin with. The next step up the ladder is another human being with no superpowers, and the fact that the franchise can produce two of these in a row is a quiet acknowledgement that for the first 6 or 7 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the word Avenger was not a power tier, it was a job description. Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow, is the slightly stronger of the two on this list, and the reason for that placement is not bigger muscles or sharper reflexes. It is the simple fact that her training has been shown, on screen and repeatedly, to defeat enhanced beings. She is the only Avenger without a superpower who has, in the course of the franchise, hand-to-hand disarmed and dropped enhanced soldiers, weathered direct combat with Winter Soldier, and held her own against the Black Order on the streets of Edinburgh. The character is introduced in Iron Man 2, released in May of 2010, as a Stark Industries employee named Natalie Rushman, whose entire first act is a slow reveal that she is something else. The reveal moment is famous. She walks into a hallway full of Hammer Industries security guards, and the camera follows her for about 90 seconds of unbroken choreography as she puts each of them on the floor with a precision that suggests she has done this many times before. Happy Hogan, sweating his way through a single opponent in the foreground, is meant to be the comedy. The choreography behind him is meant to be the warning. What that scene establishes, and what every appearance afterward refines, is that the strict measurement of her power is not in what she can lift or how fast she can run. It is in her efficiency. Her movement vocabulary is built around joint locks, leverage takedowns, and the use of an opponent's weight against themselves. She fights as though every encounter is a math problem she has already solved. In The Avengers, she escapes from a basement interrogation room while tied to a chair by tricking 3 armed Russian gangsters into thinking she is the victim, and then she dismantles them, still tied to the chair, in under a minute. The chair is the punchline. The dismantling is the actual character. Her gadget loadout is small but versatile. She carries a pair of compact pistols and the Widow's Bite, a pair of bracelets that deliver an electrical shock powerful enough to drop a man instantly, and, on at least one occasion in The Winter Soldier, to disable enhanced opponents long enough to escape. She uses cabling, batons, garrots, and improvised weapons. She does not carry trick arrows or wear armor. She wears a black tactical suit, and she does the job the suit was designed for. The cumulative effect across her appearances in Iron Man 2 in 2010, The Avengers in 2012, Captain America the Winter Soldier in 2014, Avengers Age of Ultron in 2015, Captain America Civil War in 2016, Avengers Infinity War in 2018, Avengers Endgame in 2019, and her own solo film Black Widow released in July of 2021, is that she has become the franchise's go-to demonstration of what a baseline human at the absolute peak of human capability looks like when placed next to gods and monsters. The Black Widow film, set chronologically between Civil War and Infinity War, takes the time the other films never gave her and uses it to fill in the part of her power set that the action sequences cannot show. She was raised inside a Soviet program called the Red Room, where young girls were taken, conditioned, surgically sterilized, and trained from childhood to be killers. The film puts the full weight of that backstory on screen. It shows her, as a child, being lifted into the program. It shows her returning to it as an adult and finding it still operating, run by Dreykov, a man who has spent decades refining the technology of mind control to the point where his widows obey him without question, because their bodies will not let them disobey. The film is, on the surface, a spy thriller. Underneath, it is the show finally explaining, in detail, what it means that this woman fights the way she fights. Her power is not strength. It is the absence of hesitation. Hesitation was trained out of her before she was old enough to question it, and the entire arc of her presence in the franchise is a slow recovery of the ability to choose. This is what makes her ranking complicated. In raw output, she is comparable to Hawkeye. In tactical capability, she is above him, because she has been shown to neutralize threats that would obliterate him in seconds. But in the longer view, her power is something the films keep gesturing at without ever quite naming. She is the person the team sends when the threat cannot be hit from a distance. When Loki needs to be played, she is the one who plays him. When Bruce Banner has to be talked down from Hulk, she is the one who does it, with a hand gesture and a phrase she calls the lullaby. And the films never explain how she developed the technique, because the explanation is not the point. The point is that she has spent her entire life learning to manage forces stronger than herself, and that competence is its own kind of power. Her death in Avengers Endgame is the show's final word on what she actually is. The film places her on Vormir with Hawkeye, the planet where the Soul Stone demands a soul for a soul, and it stages a sequence in which the two of them argue over which one will jump. Both want to be the one who dies so the other can live. Both believe the other has more reason to come back. Hawkeye has his family, Natasha has the team, which she has spent the previous 5 years of in-universe time treating as her family because she does not have one of her own. She wins the argument the only way she can, by jumping first. The film does not score the moment with swelling music. It does not give her a final monologue. It shows the long, slow fall to the rocks below, and then it cuts to Hawkeye underwater, gasping. The show is not being sentimental about her power. It is telling you what her power has always been, the ability to make the trade that no one else is willing to make. That places her above Hawkeye. Not by much, but by enough that when the line forms on the battlefield in Endgame, she is not standing in it, because she is the reason the line is there at all. The portals open because of her sacrifice. The reversal of the snap is possible because she made the math work. The team's strongest member is, in this sense, the one with the lowest raw output and the highest willingness to spend herself completely. The list will spend a lot of time talking about strength as the ability to deliver force. Her ranking is a reminder that strength is also the ability to absorb consequence. She is the second weakest Avenger on this list. She is also, depending on how you measure, the reason the rest of the list still has a universe to stand in. That brings the list to the third entry, which is the first one in which the human being underneath the suit gets meaningfully enhanced by what the suit can do. Sam Wilson, the Falcon, occupies an interesting middle position on this ranking because there are two versions of him. There is the Sam Wilson, who first appears in Captain America: The Winter Soldier in April of 2014, wearing a military-designed flight harness called the Exo-7, which gives him mechanical wings and rocket-assisted flight, but otherwise leaves him as a former pararescue veteran with a sidearm and a vest. And then there is the Sam Wilson, who appears at the end of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier in April of 2021, wearing a Wakandan-designed redesign of the suit that incorporates vibranium wings, an integrated weapons system, and the legacy of a shield he has decided, after a great deal of struggle, to carry. The first version is barely above a baseline human with a flight pack. The second version is something else. The Winter Soldier introduces him in a way that is so casual, it almost hides what he is. He meets Steve Rogers on a jogging trail in Washington, D.C. Steve passes him several times, each time apologizing as he laps him, and Sam, recognizing exactly who is doing the lapping, takes it with good humor. They talk. Sam mentions that he works at the VA running counseling sessions for veterans dealing with combat trauma. The film does not introduce his power set in this scene. It introduces his function. He is the veteran who helps other veterans, the one who knows how to sit with people who have come back from something they cannot describe. Steve, who has come back from being frozen in ice for 70 years, is the most extreme possible version of that kind of veteran. The friendship makes immediate sense. The flight pack comes later, when Steve breaks into a warehouse and finds the Exo-7 still sitting in storage from Sam's days in a special operations unit called Falcon, which is where the codename comes from. The wings deploy in two configurations: Combat Extended, where they spread wide for high-speed flight and aggressive maneuvering; Flight Gliding, where they curve into a tighter shape for stable cruising. The wings are mechanical, articulated, and tipped with small jet engines that allow him to launch from a standstill and to outrun helicopter pursuit. He carries dual handguns and, in later films, an automatic rifle. He also deploys a drone called Red Wing, which provides reconnaissance and limited combat support. In the original film, the package is impressive but limited. He is essentially a very mobile soldier with a uniquely terrifying angle of attack. He cannot survive a sustained engagement with an enhanced opponent. The film shows this clearly, when Winter Soldier tears one of his wings off in midair and sends him crashing through a window. What changes him is the choice the show makes in Avengers Infinity War, and again in Avengers Endgame, where it puts him in the field alongside Vision, Wanda, Steve, and Natasha during the Battle of Wakanda, and then again on the battlefield outside the compound, and watches him keep up. He is not the strongest fighter in any of those sequences, but he is the one whose mobility lets him cover the most ground, the one who calls in air support, the one who in Endgame famously delivers the line that lets Steve know the rest of the heroes have arrived. The line happens on Steve's radio. Steve is alone in the wreckage, bleeding, picking up his shield to face Thanos and a full army. The radio crackles. A familiar voice asks if Steve can hear him and tells him to look up, and then the sky opens with portals. Sam's actual power, in those moments, is not the wings. It is that he is the one who comes back. He is the one who, when the team scatters after Civil War and goes underground, stays with Steve. He is the one who, when the snap takes him in Infinity War, comes back through the portal in time to make the difference. And he is the one who, in the final scene of Endgame, sits with old Steve on a bench by a lake and accepts the shield from him, even though he does not feel ready, even though the show makes it clear that he is not ready, because the shield was never about being ready. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the 6-episode Disney Plus series released in spring of 2021, is the show working through what it actually means for Sam to carry the shield. The series does not pretend that the transition is smooth. It opens with him giving the shield to a museum, watching the government hand it to a different soldier named John Walker, and then spending the rest of the season dealing with the consequences of that decision. By the final episode, he has built a new suit in Wakanda, integrated the shield into his fighting style, and started calling himself Captain America. The new suit is the one that elevates his power ranking. It is lighter, more durable, and built from vibranium, which absorbs kinetic energy and converts it into a usable form. The wings are sharper, the integrated weapons are more sophisticated, and the shield in his hands behaves differently than it did in Steve's, because he is not throwing it the way a super soldier throws it. He is throwing it the way a man who has spent his entire life calculating angles and trajectories from the air throws it. That places him above the 2 pure humans on the list, not by an order of magnitude, by a meaningful margin. He has flight, he has air-to-ground mobility, he has integrated weapons, and he has a vibranium shield that can take a punch from beings well above his weight class. The show ranks him here not because his power output is on a different tier from theirs, but because his ability to choose his engagements, to control the geometry of a fight, makes him survivable in situations that would kill them. The third weakest Avenger is also the first one whose power set actually scales when the threat does. The final scene of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which the show lingers on for several minutes, takes place at a community center event in Sam's hometown of Delacroix, Louisiana, where he is delivering food to neighbors and helping to launch a small boat his sister has refused to sell despite the financial pressure to do so. He is in the new suit. The local children are watching him. He is, in that moment, the most visible Black Captain America the franchise has ever produced, and the show stages the scene with the kind of quiet weight that the previous Captain America's final scenes earned. The point is not that he is more powerful than Steve was. The point is that the suit, in his hands, has a different meaning. He has flown above Wakanda. He has fought aliens. He has, at the time of the scene, just disarmed a terrorist organization in front of the United Nations and given a public address that the films treat as the moral center of the entire series. The ranking is the inventory of his abilities. The community center is what he is choosing to use them on. Both belong on the same page. The next entry on the list is the man who has spent more time in armor than any character on this entire ranking, with the possible exception of Tony Stark himself, and whose suit, depending on which model is currently active, is closer to a walking weapons platform than anything else in the franchise. James Rhodes, Colonel of the United States Air Force and pilot of the War Machine armor, is the first character on this list whose body is not the primary weapon. The body is the cargo. The suit is the weapon. Rhodey is introduced in Iron Man, released in May of 2008, as Tony Stark's military liaison and one of his only real friends. He is played in that film by Terrence Howard. Beginning with Iron Man 2 in 2010, the role is taken over by Don Cheadle, who has carried it through every appearance since. The transition happens with a degree of casualness that the films simply ask the audience to accept, and the audience, by and large, has accepted. The character himself does not change. He is still the steady, exasperated officer who has to navigate his loyalty to a friend who is also a destabilizing force in international policy. The suit is what changes. In Iron Man 2, he commandeers one of Tony's older Mark II prototypes during a domestic dispute that involves Tony, drunk in his birthday party suit, firing repulsor blasts at watermelons. Rhodey puts on the Mark II, the two of them fight through the mansion, and the suit eventually walks out the front door with Rhodey inside it and goes straight to the United States military, which fits it with a Hammer Industries weapons package and renames it War Machine. The package adds a shoulder-mounted minigun, a flight stabilization upgrade, and a rack of small precision missiles. From that point on, Rhodey's suits are designed primarily around the philosophy that if a problem cannot be solved with a repulsor blast, it can probably be solved by adding more guns. His power set, accordingly, is straightforward. He has flight, he has armored protection comparable to Stark's mid-range suits, he has the full repulsor and unibeam loadout, and he carries an external weapons system that Stark generally does not bother with. The minigun is shoulder-mounted and gimbaled. The missile pods can be reconfigured between engagements. Later versions of the suit, particularly the ones seen in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, incorporate retractable rotary cannons, sonic weapons, and a redesigned thruster pack that allows him to keep up with Stark's nanotech suits in atmospheric combat. The Endgame model in particular, which he wears throughout the time heist sequences and the final battle, is built on a heavier frame than any other suit on the team and is the closest thing the franchise has produced to a personal mobile artillery platform. His ranking is complicated by an event in Captain America: Civil War, released in May of 2016, which the show does not pretend to resolve. During the airport battle in Leipzig, Vision misfires a repulsor blast aimed at Falcon and hits Rhodey instead, knocking him out of the sky from a high altitude. He hits the ground hard enough that his spine is permanently damaged. He survives, the suit having absorbed most of the impact, but the lower half of his body is left without function. The film does not soften this. It cuts to him in a hospital bed afterward, in physical therapy, learning to walk again, with the assistance of mechanical leg braces that Stark designs and installs personally. From that point on, every appearance of Rhodey out of the suit is in those braces, and the show treats them as a permanent feature of his life, rather than a temporary inconvenience to be eventually written away. This matters for the ranking because it tells you something about how the show thinks about armor as a power source. The suit is not Rhodey. The suit is a tool he gets into. When the tool is on, his combat output is comparable to a mid-tier Iron Man variant. When it is off, he is a man with damaged nerves and metal braces, who can still strategize and command, but cannot personally do much on the battlefield. The Iron Man comparison is the right one here. Stark's suits are also tools, but Stark's mind designs them, and Stark's mind is part of the weapon. Rhodey is a career military officer, not a billionaire engineer. He uses what Stark gives him. His tactical judgment is excellent. His personal engineering contribution is limited. What earns him this place on the list, above Falcon and below the next entry, is precisely the firepower of the platform he is piloting. A fully kitted War Machine suit can sustain combat against enhanced opponents, can engage Chitauri or Outrider infantry at scale, and can hold a position in a battlefield where unarmored personnel would be cut down in seconds. The endgame final battle includes a long sequence in which Rhodey, after the Gauntlet is dropped, dives into the rubble of the compound to try to recover it before Thanos' forces can. He is alone for most of that sequence. He covers ground in a flooded subterranean tunnel that would have drowned a non-armored human. He coordinates with Hulk and Ant-Man over the comms. The show is using him there as a unit of measurement. He is what a normal person becomes when you put them inside Stark technology and point them at a problem. His arc in the franchise is the slow accumulation of the cost of that role. He starts as the friend in the suit. He becomes the symbol the government can point to when they want to argue that Iron Man should be controlled. He becomes the person who, in Civil War, signs the Sokovia Accords on the government side and watches that decision split the team. And he becomes, by the end of Endgame, the only original team member, other than Hawkeye, still standing at the funeral by the lake. The show ranks him in the middle, not because his power set is mid-tier, but because the suit's output is mid-tier, while the man inside it is operating in the highest possible echelon of human discipline and military command. The next entry is going to be the first one on this list whose body is itself enhanced by something beyond ordinary biology. The first character on this list whose body is genuinely no longer fully human is Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier. And the qualification on the word genuinely is important here, because Bucky's enhancement is one of the franchise's most carefully understated power sources. The show does not give him a transformation scene. It does not give him a moment where the abilities arrive and the music swells. The show simply tells you, late in his first appearance as the Winter Soldier, that the Soviet program that conditioned him also injected him with a variant of the super soldier serum, and that this is why a man who fought in the Howling Commandos during the Second World War is still alive and looks no older than he did in 1945. His introduction comes in Captain America, the First Avenger, released in July of 2011, where he is presented as Steve Rogers' best friend from Brooklyn. He ships out to fight in Europe. He is captured by Hydra. Steve rescues him from a Hydra base where he is being experimented on by Arnim Zola. They fight side by side for the next year, and then, in the climactic confrontation with Zola aboard a Hydra train, Bucky is knocked off the side and falls into a ravine. Steve sees him fall. The film treats him as dead. Captain America: The Winter Soldier, released in April of 2014, reveals that he was not. He survived the fall because the Zola experiments had given him an early form of the enhancement that would later be perfected and given to Steve. Hydra recovered him, replaced his missing left arm with a prosthetic made of metal, and put him through a conditioning program that erased his identity and trained him to be an asset they could deploy on command. For the next 70 years, he is brought out of cryogenic storage whenever Hydra needs an assassination. He kills, among many others, Tony Stark's parents. He has no memory of any of it. He is given trigger words in Russian that put him under any operator's control. He becomes, in effect, a weapon Hydra owns. His power set, mechanical and otherwise, is precise. He has enhanced strength, on the order of multiple times peak human, although below Captain America's level. He has enhanced reflexes, accelerated healing, and an immune response that has kept him alive through conditions that would have destroyed an unenhanced body. His prosthetic arm, in its original Hydra version, is a steel weapon that can punch through concrete, deflect bullets, and absorb blows from Captain America's vibranium shield. By the events of Black Panther, released in February of 2018, the original arm has been removed in Wakanda, and by the time he takes the field in Infinity War, the steel arm has been replaced by a Wakandan-designed vibranium model that is lighter, more responsive, and quieter than the original. The Wakandan arm changes his combat profile slightly. He moves with less mechanical noise. The arm itself can absorb kinetic energy in the way that vibranium does, which gives him a degree of defense against energy weapons that the steel arm did not provide. In a straight fight, he is roughly equivalent to a baseline super soldier. The Winter Soldier shows him going hand-to-hand with Steve on a Washington overpass, and the two of them move at speeds that civilian bystanders cannot track. He fires firearms with both hands at once, drives motorcycles through enemy lines, and survives gunshots that should have killed him because his healing factor closes the wounds faster than the blood loss can. The film is careful to never quite let him win a one-on-one against Steve, but it is also careful to never let him lose decisively. They are equals. What changes his ranking, and what elevates him above Rhodey on this list, is the cumulative effect of the conditioning. The Hydra program did not just enhance his body, it tuned his mind for killing in a way that the show treats as both a power and a curse. He can read a room for threats faster than any unenhanced operator. He can pattern match weapons, exits, hostile positions, and friendly positions in the time it takes him to take a single step into a space. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier explores this in detail. There is a scene in the third episode where he, Sam, and the unstable replacement Captain America John Walker enter a hostile environment together, and the show stages the entry so that Bucky's eyes move across the space first and find every relevant detail before either of the others have begun to assess. The other two are doing competent work. Bucky is doing the work of a different species. The cost of that capability is the weight of what he has done with it. The film White Wolf, the name the Wakandans give him after his recovery in Black Panther, is the show's attempt to give him a path back. The Hydra trigger words are removed by Shuri's technology. The conditioning is broken. The arm is replaced, and for the first time since 1945, he is free to make his own decisions. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier puts him in therapy in its very first episode, sitting across from a court-ordered counselor who is trying to get him to acknowledge the names of the people he killed under Hydra's control. He cannot. The show holds on his face. He is a man with the power to do nearly anything, and the only thing he wants is to be allowed to apologize. That places him here, above Rhodey, who is more mobile and better armed, but who is, when the suit comes off, a man in a machine. Below the next entry, who has access to a kind of power that operates on a different physical principle entirely. Bucky is the first entry on the list whose enhancement is fully integrated into the body. He is also, in some ways, the first entry on the list for whom the power is not the story. The story is what he does with it now that he no longer belongs to anyone. The next step up the ranking is the first character on the list whose suit and biology have both been enhanced by the same substance, and whose entire nation is built around understanding how that substance works. T'Challa, the Black Panther, occupies a position on this ranking that is genuinely difficult to place because his power profile sits at the exact midpoint where physical enhancement, technological enhancement, and political authority all combine into a single category. He is introduced in Captain America: Civil War in May of 2016 and given his own solo film in February of 2018, and the two films together build out a power set that is much larger than either one shows on its own. His introduction in Civil War is one of the most assured character launches the franchise has produced. He appears first in a suit and tie as the son of King T'Chaka of Wakanda at the United Nations Conference in Vienna, where the Sokovia Accords are being signed. A bomb goes off, his father is killed. T'Challa, within the next sequence, is in the suit of the Black Panther, pursuing the man he believes is responsible across a city skyline at a speed and agility that the film places squarely between Captain America and Spider-Man. The suit is black, ribbed with silver accents, and the camera tracks him for a full chase sequence in which he is leaping from car to car, deflecting bullets, and engaging Captain America in a hand-to-hand exchange that establishes him immediately as a tier of fighter the team did not know existed. The power set has two layers. The first is biological. The Wakandan royal family, on assuming the mantle of the Black Panther, consumes a substance called the heart-shaped herb, which grants superhuman strength, speed, reflexes, durability, and senses. The herb does not produce results comparable to the super soldier serum directly. It produces something different. The serum gives a baseline human the peak of human capability. The herb gives a baseline human enhancements that exceed peak human in every dimension, and gives them a degree of sensory acuity that approaches the predatory. T'Challa can track scent. He can hear conversations at distances ordinary people cannot. He moves with a fluidity that the films choreograph specifically to evoke the feel of a large cat rather than a person. The second layer is the suit. The Wakandan Black Panther suit is, by most accounts, the franchise's most advanced personal armor, with the possible exception of Tony Stark's nanotech models. It is woven from a vibranium mesh that absorbs kinetic energy. The energy can be released back outward as a shockwave on command, which means that anyone who lands a serious blow on him is, in effect, charging the weapon that will be used against them on the next strike. The suit's claws are vibranium and can cut through nearly any material the films have shown. The suit's mask can fold away on command, presented in the films as a kind of nanotech reconfiguration that allows him to switch from civilian to combatant in seconds. By Avengers Infinity War, the suit has been further refined by his sister Shuri, who is the franchise's most accomplished engineer outside of Stark and Banner, and who designs upgrades that integrate energy projection, improved sensor displays, and the kinetic discharge bursts that he uses to clear Outrider waves on the Wakandan battlefield. Black Panther, the solo film, is the show building out the larger context of what his power actually means. He is not just a fighter. He is the head of state of the wealthiest and most technologically advanced nation in the world, a country that has spent centuries hiding its capabilities from the rest of humanity and that owns nearly all known vibranium. The film stages his coronation as a ritual challenge in which any rival member of a Wakandan tribe can fight him for the throne. He fights M'Baku of the Jabari and wins. He later fights Eric Killmonger, his cousin, and loses, going over the edge of a waterfall and being presumed dead. Killmonger sits on the throne for the middle third of the film, eats the heart-shaped herb himself, gains the same enhancement, and uses it. The film is careful to show that the power is transferable. The mantle of the Black Panther is a position, not a birthright in the strict sense. T'Challa, when he returns and reclaims it, is doing so because he has decided that what Killmonger represents is too dangerous to allow. What this means for the ranking is that his power, even in narrow combat terms, is comparable to or slightly above Captain America's. He is faster. His suit absorbs damage that the shield cannot. His reflexes, augmented by the herb, allow him to handle multiple simultaneous opponents at speeds that the films stage as borderline impossible. The Wakanda battle sequence in Avengers Infinity War features him leading a charge across an open field against thousands of Outriders, and his combat output in that sequence is in the same class as Steve's and Thor's and Wanda's, which is the highest the show has produced up to that point. What places him here on the list, rather than higher, is that all of those advantages are bound to specific conditions. The suit can be damaged. The herb's enhancements last as long as the herb is in his system, which in the comics is variable, and in the films is treated as more or less permanent, but tied to a ritual context. And, most importantly, the actor Chadwick Boseman's death in August of 2020 means that the character's arc in the franchise was cut short before the films could fully explore the upper bounds of what he could do. Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, released in November of 2022, sits with the consequences of that loss. The mantle is eventually passed to Shuri, who consumes a synthesized version of the herb and assumes the role. But the original T'Challa, the one this entry is ranking, is positioned at the moment of his last on-screen appearance, which is the funeral by the lake in Endgame. He was, at that moment, one of the most powerful pure combatants on the team. He was also, in a way the show is careful to underline, the only Avenger who was also a head of state, which means his power on the battlefield was always doubled by his power off it. That places him above Bucky, significantly above, and just below the next entry, which is the first character on the list whose power source is biological, in a way that has nothing to do with serums or herbs, and everything to do with a single chance encounter with an irradiated arachnid. Peter Parker, Spider-Man, is the youngest Avenger on this list by a wide margin, and one of the most genuinely powerful entries in the middle tier. He is introduced in Captain America: Civil War in May of 2016, recruited by Tony Stark to fight in the airport battle in Leipzig, and given his own solo film, Spider-Man: Homecoming, in July of 2017. The character at the time of his recruitment is 15 years old. He has been operating in a homemade red and blue costume in Queens for about 6 months. Tony finds him by tracking videos of his interventions in petty crime that have been posted to social media. The recruitment scene, in Peter's bedroom in Queens, is the show telling you the entire story of his power in miniature. A teenager whose abilities have already attracted the attention of a billionaire industrialist, and who has been keeping the abilities a secret from his Aunt May because he does not want her to worry. The origin of his power is given in fragments across his solo films and his appearances in the team films. By most accounts pieced together from his own offhand references, he was bitten by a genetically modified spider, and the bite altered his physiology at the cellular level. He developed enhanced strength, in the range of being able to lift several tons under stress, enhanced reflexes that allow him to dodge bullets at close range, enhanced agility, the ability to adhere to vertical surfaces by manipulating microscopic structures in his fingertips and feet, and a precognitive danger sense that the films present as a tingling sensation he describes as the Peter tingle, and that more or less alerts him to incoming attacks before they arrive. He also has the engineering ability, on his own and at 15 years old, to design a chemical formula for spider web fluid and to construct mechanical wrist-mounted shooters that deploy the fluid as ropes, nets, and balls of webbing capable of restraining beings several times his weight. His Stark design suit, given to him in Civil War and refined across his solo films, adds another layer to a power set that was already substantial. The suit has integrated combat artificial intelligence, originally named Karen, which provides tactical analysis, identifies opponents, and offers targeting suggestions. It deploys a wide array of web configurations, including taser webs, splitter webs, and webs designed to expand on impact. It includes a heads-up display in the eye lenses that allows him to filter visual noise and focus on specific threats. By Spider-Man: Far From Home, released in July of 2019, Stark has left him an upgraded suit and an AI system called Edith that has access to satellite weaponry, although the film is, in many ways, an extended meditation on how a 15-year-old should not be given a satellite weapons system. His ranking is interesting because in raw combat output he is genuinely competitive with several entries above him on this list. The airport battle in Leipzig is the show's first demonstration of this. Peter, in a low-specification Stark suit, takes the field against Captain America, Falcon, Bucky, Hawkeye, Ant-Man in his giant form, and Scarlet Witch. He holds his own. He catches a thrown Captain America shield out of the air. He dodges a Falcon dive. He delivers a string of one-liners that the rest of the team finds both impressive and deeply confusing, because they have just realized they are fighting a child. The sequence is played for comedy, but the underlying physics are not comedic. A 15-year-old in a Stark suit is, by every measurable metric, hanging at the level of the franchise's most experienced fighters. What pulls him above the previous entry on this list, and below the next one, is the consistency problem. His power output, by the metrics of the films, scales with his emotional state. When he is calm and confident, he can dismantle a vulture and survive a building collapsing on him. When he is panicked, when his spidey sense is failing him because of trauma or because he is being deliberately deceived, he can be hit by a moving train and laid out for hours. Spider-Man: Homecoming includes both moments. The film stages a scene in the final act in which the vulture deliberately collapses an entire warehouse roof onto him, and the camera holds, for what feels like a full minute, on Peter under a mountain of rubble, sobbing and trying to remember what Tony told him about the suit, before he summons the strength to push the entire warehouse off his back. That moment is the show telling you that his power has a floor and a ceiling that are not the same as the floor and ceiling of an adult superhero. The floor is wherever his fear has put him. The ceiling is wherever his sense of responsibility has pulled him. The cumulative impact of his appearances in Civil War, Homecoming, Infinity War, Far From Home, Endgame, No Way Home in December of 2021, and his ongoing presence in the franchise is that he occupies a position on this ranking just above the Black Panther in pure combat output and below the next entry in terms of versatility. He has enhanced strength, enhanced reflexes, danger sense, wall crawling, web shooters, an iron spider suit that includes 4 extending mechanical arms, and an emotional ceiling that, when he reaches it, allows him to do things the other entries on this list have not been shown to do. In Avengers: Endgame, during the final battle, he carries the Gauntlet for a stretch across an open field while being chased by a horde of outriders, and his combat improvisation in that sequence, swinging from debris and using webs to bind enemy weapons, is the work of someone whose power set is genuinely difficult to engage if you do not have the speed to match him. What he does not have is durability comparable to a super soldier or to the heavy hitters above this point in the list. He bruises, he bleeds, he gets knocked unconscious. His healing is enhanced, but nowhere near the level of Bucky or Steve. And he is still, at the time of every appearance in the franchise, a young person who is trying to balance crime fighting with high school and, in the post-Endgame films, with the catastrophic personal cost of being the most famous superhero in the world. Spider-Man No Way Home ends with a memory erasure spell that wipes the world's knowledge of his identity, which means he goes back to being a kid in Queens who nobody knows is also the Avenger who once carried the Infinity Gauntlet across a battlefield. That is the kind of power inversion the show specializes in. He is, by raw measurement, one of the strongest Avengers under 30. He is also, by his own quiet preference, the one who would most like to not be. That places him at this position, above the Black Panther in versatility and below the next entry, which is the one that introduces the franchise's most unusual power source and uses it to do things that, when you actually stop and consider what they imply, are so strange that the films have spent multiple movies declining to fully think them through. The next entry on this list is the man who can shrink to the size of an ant or grow to the size of a building, and the placement is going to seem high to anyone who has read his power set as a gimmick rather than as the most physically destabilizing ability in the entire franchise. Scott Lang, the Ant-Man, is introduced in Ant-Man, released in July of 2015, and elevated to Avenger status in Captain America Civil War the following year. He is the second man to use the Ant-Man identity, taking over from the original Hank Pym, who developed the Pym particles that make the suit work. The Pym particle is one of the strangest inventions in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. According to the films, the particle alters the distance between atoms in any given object, either reducing it so that the object shrinks while retaining its mass, or expanding it so that the object grows while becoming proportionally less dense. The implications of this technology, taken seriously, are catastrophic to the universe's normal physics. A shrunken Ant-Man retains the mass of a full-sized man, which means his punches are delivered with the full force of a 180-pound human, concentrated into a fingertip-sized impact area. A grown Ant-Man, in his giant man configuration, is several stories tall and walking around with the structural integrity of a person who has been stretched into a much larger volume, which is to say with enormous force, but reduced relative density. The films are inconsistent about how this scales, but they are consistent about what it allows him to do. His power set, accordingly, is unusual. He has the suit, which contains a regulator on his belt that controls particle flow and determines his current size. He has the helmet, which protects his head and allows him to communicate at any scale. He has a collection of communication and control devices that allow him to direct ant colonies, which sounds absurd as a sentence, and which the films present with absolute seriousness. He can ride a flying carpenter ant named Antony. He can summon swarms of bullet ants for offensive operations. He can use crazy ants to short out electronic locks. The Ant-Man film treats the ant control as a comedic feature. The follow-up films treat it as a strategic asset. His combat applications, when the franchise commits to taking him seriously, are extreme. The airport battle in Civil War features him deploying as Giant Man for the first time, growing to a height of about 60 feet, and using his bulk to throw vehicles, lift a Spider-Man off his back, and brawl with War Machine and Iron Man simultaneously. The sequence is shot to look like comedy, but a 60-foot-tall man with the proportional strength of a full-grown adult is, by any sober measurement, the most physically dominant unit on that battlefield. In Avengers Endgame, during the final battle, he grows to a height the film does not specify, but which appears to be in the range of 90 to 100 feet, and he carries the surviving Avengers across an active war zone on his shoulders. The implication of that sequence is that his strength in giant form scales high enough to handle anything the franchise has produced, short of the highest tier of beings on this list. What elevates him on this ranking is the second direction the technology goes. He can also shrink, and not just to the size of an ant. In the climactic act of Ant-Man, in order to break the integrity of an enemy suit, he shrinks below the size of a molecule and enters what the film calls the quantum realm, a dimension where time and space do not behave the way they do in the standard universe. He survives the journey. He returns. And this becomes, in a way that the franchise spends years setting up, the central piece of physics that makes the entire reversal of the snap in Avengers Endgame possible. Without Scott Lang and the quantum realm, there is no time travel. Without time travel, there is no endgame. The Avengers do not win. That sequence is not the show being cute about a small hero accidentally saving the universe. It is the show telling you, with the full weight of its biggest payoff scene, that the gimmicky character with the size-changing suit is actually carrying around access to a dimension that the rest of the franchise's heaviest hitters cannot reach. Doctor Strange, who in this list is going to rank in the top tier of magic users, cannot navigate the quantum realm. Captain Marvel, who is going to rank in the top 3 for raw cosmic output, cannot navigate it either. The only beings in the entire franchise who can reliably operate inside the quantum realm are Janet Van Dyne, the original Wasp, who spent roughly 30 years stranded there, Hank Pym, who studied the underlying particle that makes access possible, Scott Lang, who has been there twice and returned, and his daughter Cassie, who in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, released in February of 2023, is brought into that dimension and survives alongside her father. The Quantumania film deepens the implications. It reveals that the quantum realm contains entire civilizations, internal politics, and at least one being, Kang the Conqueror, whose power is at the highest tier the franchise has ever introduced. Scott's ability to enter that space, navigate it, and return changes the calculus of his ranking entirely. He is not just a man who can change size. He is a man who has direct, repeatable access to a layer of reality that the rest of the team has to negotiate around. His own personality and combat style remain, throughout this, refreshingly grounded. He is a former cat burglar who served time in San Quentin. He is the divorced father of a young daughter named Cassie, whose custody he is trying to maintain. He cracks jokes during combat that the rest of the team finds either endearing or distracting depending on the moment. His Avengers tenure begins with him being recruited by Falcon and ends with him being the literal mechanism by which the team wins the most important fight in their history. He is not the most powerful man on this list, but he is the man whose power, when you actually examine it, is the strangest, and the man without whom the rest of the list does not exist. That places him above Spider-Man and below the next entry, which is the slightly more refined and slightly more deadly version of the same suit, in the hands of someone whose family invented the technology in the first place. The next step up is Hope Van Dyne, the Wasp, whose ranking is a fraction above Scott Lang's, despite their suits using identical technology. And the reason for the difference is that her suit and her training are both superior to his by every measurable standard. She is introduced in Ant-Man in 2015 as Hank Pym's daughter, the operations director of his company, and the person who has been training Scott Lang to use the suit. She does not take the field herself in that film. The decision is presented as Hank's protective overreaction to the loss of her mother Janet decades earlier, and the film ends with him showing her a prototype Wasp suit and telling her, essentially, that it is time. Ant-Man and the Wasp, released in July of 2018, is the show following through on that promise. The Wasp suit is a refined version of the Ant-Man suit, with 3 key differences. First, it includes integrated wings, mechanical and modeled on insect wings, that allow her to fly while at full size or at reduced sizes. Second, it includes integrated blaster gauntlets that deliver concussive energy shots at any scale. Third, the suit's regulator is more advanced, allowing her to change size mid-combat with greater precision and to chain size changes together in ways that Scott cannot. The combination produces a fighter whose combat profile is, in straight terms, more dangerous than his. The famous demonstration is the kitchen fight scene in Ant-Man and the Wasp, in which she takes on a room of armed mercenaries by oscillating between full-size, half-size, and ant-size in rapid succession, throwing kitchen utensils that have been temporarily enlarged using a PIM disc, and finishing the encounter with each opponent unconscious on the floor. The sequence is shot in long takes that emphasize the choreography. Scott, watching from a doorway, comments that he should have asked her to teach him to fight that way. The sequence is the show telling you why she ranks where she does. Same technology, better training, more refined application. Her tactical contribution to the franchise is concentrated in 2 films, plus her appearance in Avengers Endgame, where she returns from the quantum realm and rejoins the team for the final battle. Her combat output during that battle is mostly oriented around battlefield support. providing close air cover and rescue maneuvers, using her flight and her size changing. She does not generate the same big set-piece moments as Scott. She is not the one who carries the team across the battlefield as a giant, but she is the one whose precision, in the close quarters of the Outrider waves, is the more lethal of the two suits. Her ranking placement is a fine-grained distinction rather than a category jump. She and Scott are essentially the same power tier, separated by training and by a small refinement of equipment. The show treats them as a unit. The Quantumania film puts them in the quantum realm together with her parents, her former boyfriend turned ally, and Scott's daughter, and the family unit becomes the central narrative engine of the film. The film also, importantly, raises the stakes of what the suits can do. Hope is shown using her size changing with a fluency that Scott can match but does not. She handles aerial combat in the quantum realm against opponents whose power level is unknown to her and emerges intact. The film ends ambiguously about the long-term implications of what they have all learned in that dimension, but her competence in it is not in question. That places her above Scott by a hair. Both are well above Spider-Man in versatility and well below the next entry, which is the first character on this list whose power source comes from inside his own body, and which transforms him into something so dangerous that for the first several years of the franchise, the team had to negotiate the conditions under which it was safe to release him. Bruce Banner, the Hulk, is the franchise's most physically destructive original Avenger and the only character on this list whose power is, in narrative terms, treated as a problem the team has to solve before they can use it. He is introduced in The Incredible Hulk, released in June of 2008, although the version of the character played by Edward Norton in that film is recast for the Avengers in 2012, and from that point forward is played by Mark Ruffalo. The recast is, like the Rhodey recast, something the franchise asks you to accept, and which becomes immediately easy, because Ruffalo's performance settles the character into a register the rest of the films build on consistently. The origin is laid out in fragments. Banner, a nuclear physicist working for the United States military on a project to recreate the super soldier serum, exposes himself to gamma radiation in a laboratory accident. The radiation does not kill him. It does not even, in any obvious way, permanently injure him. What it does is bind itself to his cells and produce a second physical state in his body that activates whenever his heart rate exceeds a threshold or when he experiences extreme emotional stress, particularly anger. In that state, his body transforms. His mass increases by a factor the films do not specify, but which is clearly several times his normal weight. His height increases to between 8 and 9 feet. His skin turns green. His musculature becomes proportionally enormous. His intelligence, in the original transformations, drops to a primal level, and he becomes, in raw physical terms, perhaps the strongest individual organism on the planet outside of Asgardian and cosmic-class beings. His power set as the Hulk is straightforward and overwhelming. He has strength sufficient to lift, in the Avengers, large pieces of a Chitauri Leviathan with his bare hands. He has durability sufficient to take a direct hit from Thor and continue fighting, which he demonstrates in their first meeting aboard the helicarrier in the Avengers, in a sequence that destroys a substantial portion of the ship. He has a regenerative ability that allows him to recover from wounds that should be fatal. His leap distance has been shown to clear miles in a single jump. His durability against energy weapons is high enough that Chitauri infantry fire bounces off him without effect. The only things in the original Avengers film that show meaningful effect against him are sustained heavy weapons fire and the impact of a Leviathan crashing on top of him, and both effects are temporary. His ranking on this list is complicated by the fact that the character is, across multiple films, two characters. There is Bruce Banner, the brilliant physicist who, when calm and in control, is one of the most intelligent humans in the franchise and a colleague of Tony Stark on multiple research projects including the creation of Vision. And there is Hulk, the Rage State, which for the first half of the franchise is treated as a separate consciousness that Bruce can call up but cannot fully control. The two of them are in a kind of unstable cohabitation throughout the Avengers Age of Ultron in 2015, and Thor Ragnarok in November of 2017, where the show stages a long sequence on the planet Sakaar, in which Hulk has been the dominant personality for 2 years and Bruce returns only when the Quinjet's recording of Natasha's voice triggers the transformation back. Thor Ragnarok also serves as the show's most extreme demonstration of Hulk's combat output in the standard Avengers film context. The arena fight in the Grand Masters Contest of Champions on Sakaar pits Hulk against Thor in single combat at full power. The fight is roughly even. Thor is faster and has access to lightning. Hulk is stronger and absorbs damage at a rate that no other being in the franchise can match. The fight ends when Loki, secretly intervening to protect his brother, has the obedience disc on Thor's neck activated. Hulk is, by the show's own choreography in that sequence, in the same combat tier as Thor at his Mjolnir-era output. That is an extraordinary statement. What complicates his ranking, and what places him here rather than higher, is the arc of Avengers Endgame, in which the character undergoes what the film calls Professor Hulk. During the 5-year time skip between Infinity War and Endgame, Bruce uses his gamma research expertise to merge the Hulk consciousness with his own. The result is a being who has the body of the Hulk, the intelligence of Bruce Banner, and the emotional stability of a man who has finally made peace with both halves of himself. Professor Hulk is, by raw measurement, less physically powerful than the Rage state. He is slower to anger and slower to commit to maximum force. The film does not pretend otherwise. There is a scene at the diner in which Scott Lang sees the new Hulk for the first time, taking selfies with children, and the visual joke is the gap between what Hulk was and what he is now. This integration is also what allows him to perform the most physically taxing single act in the entire franchise, which is the snap that reverses the original snap. In Endgame, after the Stark-designed nano-gauntlet is assembled, the team has to decide who is going to wear it and execute the reversal. Thor volunteers and is told no. Steve volunteers and is told no. The choice falls to Hulk because his body, having been built up by gamma radiation for over a decade, is the only organism on the team that has any chance of channeling the power of all 6 Infinity Stones without being destroyed. He puts the gauntlet on. He snaps. The energy travels up his arm and burns the entire right side of his body. He survives. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier and the She-Hulk Disney Plus series, released in August of 2022, both show him afterward with his right arm permanently injured, but with the rest of him intact. That sequence settles his ranking. He is, in pure physical output, comfortably above every character below him on this list. He is also, in his Professor Hulk integration, the only being on Earth who could absorb the energy of the Gauntlet and live. What keeps him from ranking higher is that the upper tiers of this list include beings whose powers operate on principles that brute strength cannot meaningfully address. Hulk hits things very hard. The next entries can hit things very hard, and also do things that brute force is not the right vocabulary for at all. But before those entries, the list passes through the 2 original founding Avengers, whose names are most associated with the franchise as a brand, and whose power sets, despite being more limited than the entries above them, are the ones that define what an Avenger is in the first place. Steve Rogers, Captain America, sits at this position on the ranking, and the placement is going to feel either too low or too high, depending on what you think you mean by power. He is introduced in Captain America: The First Avenger, released in July of 2011, and his story is told in chronological sequence across that film: The Avengers in 2012, Captain America: The Winter Soldier in 2014, Avengers: Age of Ultron in 2015, Captain America: Civil War in 2016, Avengers: Infinity War in 2018, and Avengers: Endgame in 2019. The arc is unusually disciplined for a franchise as large as this one. He starts as a small, sickly young man from Brooklyn who has been rejected from military service for a list of medical conditions that fills an entire page. He is approved into Project Rebirth, a secret program run by Dr. Abraham Erskine to test the super soldier serum on a human subject. The serum works. His body is augmented to the peak of human physical capability across every measurable dimension, and from that moment on, he is something that the franchise has spent 15 years gradually defining. His power set is, on paper, modest compared to most of the entries above him. He has peak human strength, which the films stage as the ability to lift around a ton in a single deadlift and to one arm press a helicopter at low altitude. He has peak human reflexes, peak human speed, peak human endurance, and a metabolism that processes alcohol and most poisons so quickly that he cannot get drunk. He has a healing factor that closes wounds within hours rather than days. He has, in his original carriage, a circular shield made of vibranium, the only known vibranium artifact on Earth until the events of Black Panther reveal Wakanda's reserves. The shield can be thrown, rebounded off multiple surfaces, and used as both an offensive and defensive instrument. In his hands, in Avengers Endgame, it becomes capable of summoning lightning, because in that film, Steve has discovered that he is worthy to wield Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor, and he uses it in the final battle to swing both the hammer and the shield against Thanos in a sequence the show stages with the full weight of an 8-year setup. What elevates him to this position on the ranking, and what makes the placement defensible despite his modest raw output relative to the entries above, is the quality the films keep returning to, which is that he is the one Avenger who will not stop. Every other character on this list has, at some point in the franchise, broken. Tony Stark has panic attacks. Thor descends into depression. Hulk goes into hiding. Natasha is hollowed out by grief. Wanda fractures. Bucky is unmade and remade. Steve, across all of his films, never does. The Winter Soldier shows him fighting against Bucky on a helicarrier that is falling into the Potomac, knowing that the fight is going to kill him, and choosing to drop the shield rather than swing it. Avengers Endgame shows him picking himself up off the rubble of the compound, with one arm not working and his shield broken in half, and walking forward to face an army alone because that is what he understands the job to require. The famous moment in Endgame is the "I can do this all day" callback. He says the line as a child in the first Avenger to a bully in a Brooklyn alley. He says it again as Captain America to Iron Man at the end of Civil War. He says it a third time in Endgame to a past version of himself during the time heist, and the show is, by that point, using the line as a kind of incantation. The point of the line is not that he can hit harder than the people he is fighting. The point of the line is that he is willing to stay on his feet for longer than they are. The serum gives him the body to do this. His character gives him the will. His endgame arc resolves with one of the franchise's most heavily debated decisions. After the snap is reversed and Tony has died, Steve volunteers to return the Infinity Stones to their original points in time. He goes back. He does not return on schedule. Sam and Bucky, waiting for him at the quantum platform, look around in confusion. And then Sam sees him, on a bench by the lake, an old man holding the shield. The film implies that Steve, after returning the stones, chose to remain in the past and live out the life he never had with Peggy Carter. He hands the shield to Sam. He smiles. He looks out at the lake. That ending, regardless of how you read it, does not change his ranking. What it does is anchor the ranking in the right register. Captain America is not on this list because of how hard he can throw a shield. He is on this list because he is the bar against which every other Avenger has been measured for over a decade. The serum and the shield are the technology. The man is the standard. The show has been telling you that since the first time he picked up the broken half of his shield in Endgame, looked at Thanos' army, and walked forward without hesitation. That places him here, comfortably above Hulk in versatility and tactical command, comfortably below the next entry in raw output. The character whose name is on the team is, by the strict measurement this list is trying to apply, not the most powerful Avenger. He never claimed to be. The placement is the show being honest about it. There is one further dimension to his ranking that the films do not foreground, but that the long view of his arc requires. Steve Rogers is, of all the entries on this list, the one whose power has been most carefully calibrated against the moral architecture of the team. Dr. Erskine, in the first Avenger, gives him the serum specifically because Steve is, in Erskine's words, a good man. The implication the entire franchise has been honoring across 15 years, is that the serum amplifies whatever was already there. Erskine had previously administered the serum to Johann Schmidt, the Red Skull, whose amplified self became a fascist warlord. Erskine had to find a different kind of person before he could try again. He found Steve. The serum did not make Steve into Captain America. The serum made the Captain America that was already inside Steve large enough to be seen. That is a different kind of statement about power than any other entry on this list carries. The The serum is reactive to the soul of the subject. Tony's suits work for anyone who can fit inside them. The Mind Stone could have been embedded in any synthetic body. The PIM particles work on any user who knows how to operate the regulator. The Super Soldier Serum, in the version Erskine perfected, was matched specifically to the kind of person who could be trusted with what it would create. Steve's placement on this list is therefore lower than the cosmic tier and higher than the unenhanced humans, but his ranking carries an asterisk that the rest of the list does not. The other entries are powerful because of what they have. He is powerful because of what he was. Before the serum, before the shield, before the team, before the war. The films have been telling you this since the first time he picked up a trash can lid in a Brooklyn alley and used it as a shield against a man twice his size, because the man would not stop hitting a smaller person, and Steve, even then, would not let that happen without intervening. That is the whole story. The next entry on this list is the man who built the modern superhero franchise out of a single appearance in a desert cave in 2008, and whose evolution across more than a decade of films is the closest the Marvel Cinematic Universe has produced to a complete character arc with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Tony Stark, Iron Man, is the entry on this ranking whose power source is, more than any other character on the list, the mind inside the suit. He is introduced in Iron Man, released in May of 2008, the film that begins the entire franchise. He is captured by terrorists in Afghanistan, held in a cave, ordered to build them a weapons system using parts from his own company's munitions, and instead constructs the first Iron Man armor as a means of escape. The original suit is improvised, gray, ugly, and barely functional. It is built by a man with a fragment of shrapnel lodged near his heart, held back from killing him only by an electromagnet powered by a miniaturized arc reactor he designed in the cave. He escapes. He returns to the United States, and he immediately begins designing better suits. The progression of his armors across the franchise is, in a real sense, the entire technological history of the modern Marvel Cinematic Universe condensed into one character's iteration cycle. The Mark III, his first proper combat suit, is gold and red and capable of supersonic flight. The Mark VI, used at the end of Iron Man 2 and into the Avengers, integrates a triangular arc reactor with new element synthesis. The Mark VII, used in the Battle of New York, deploys automatically from a chest sensor and adds shoulder-mounted missile racks. The Iron Man 3 film, released in May of 2013, introduces a Mark 42 with prehensile component summoning, in which individual pieces of armor can fly across rooms and assemble onto his body in real time. By Avengers Infinity War in 2018, the suit is nanotechnology. He stores the entire armor in a small device on his sternum and reconfigures it on demand into any shape the situation requires. From a full-body combat suit to a bladed sword, to a unibeam cannon to a heat shield large enough to deflect a meteor. His power set, in its mature form, is therefore not a fixed list. It is a design language. The Mark 85, used in Avengers Endgame for the final battle and for the snap that ends Thanos, is the most sophisticated personal armor ever produced in the franchise. It has flight, repulsor blasts, unibeam projection, energy shielding, integrated weapons systems, a small fleet of supporting drones, and the ability to reconfigure individual components to handle threats his AI cannot anticipate in advance. The AI in question, by Endgame, is Friday, the replacement for Jarvis who became Vision. Friday runs the suit's threat assessment, weapons targeting, and tactical analysis at speeds far beyond Tony's own. The suit is, in a real sense, two intelligences working in concert. His ranking above Captain America is based on raw output and versatility. A fully kitted Mark 85 outclasses any human, super soldier or otherwise, in flight speed, in energy weapons, in defensive capability, and in the ability to engage threats at any scale. The Battle of New York in the Avengers shows him flying a nuclear missile through a wormhole and surviving the trip. Avengers Age of Ultron shows him going hand-to-hand with Hulk in the Hulkbuster armor and surviving an extended brawl. Captain America Civil War shows him taking a sustained beating from Steve and Bucky and remaining standing. Avengers Infinity War shows him going one-on-one with Thanos on Titan. briefly cutting him with a nanotech blade and surviving an exchange with the Mad Titan that the rest of the team on that planet could not. What complicates his ranking is the same thing that complicates Rhodey's. He is the suit. Out of the suit, he is a man with chronic anxiety, a heart condition for most of the franchise, and a substance abuse pattern that the films treat with varying degrees of seriousness. Iron Man 2 stages an entire act around his arc reactor poisoning, which the original palladium core is causing, and which forces him to synthesize a new element to keep himself alive. Iron Man 3 stages most of its action around him being out of the armor more often than in it, and ends with him removing the shrapnel from his chest cavity in an act that he frames as finally being free of the suit, although he goes on to wear suits in essentially every subsequent appearance. The relationship between Tony and his armor is the longest character thread the franchise has. The suits are not just tools. They are, in a way the films keep returning to, attempts to solve a problem that does not have a technological solution. He builds Ultron in Age of Ultron because he wants a global defense system that can replace the need for a team of heroes who will inevitably die or fail. Ultron becomes sentient, decides that the answer to human extinction risk is human extinction, and the film spends the rest of its runtime cleaning up his mistake. He pushes for the Sokovia Accords in Civil War because he has internalized the guilt of every civilian casualty the team has caused, and believes that government oversight will somehow distribute that guilt across a larger surface area. The Accords split the team. He spends Infinity War alone, off-planet, fighting Thanos with Spider-Man and the Guardians. He spends Endgame trying to rebuild himself as a father and a husband, until the moment the team comes back and he agrees to design the time travel solution, knowing that doing so will probably cost him everything. His final act is the snap that ends Thanos. In the closing minutes of Endgame, with the Infinity Stones embedded in his own nanotech gauntlet, he uses them to dust the Mad Titan and his entire army. The energy of the snap kills him. The film holds on his face. He says, essentially, that he is Iron Man. The arc reactor on his chest flickers out. Pepper, kneeling beside him, tells him he can rest now. That sequence is the show telling you the truth about his ranking. He is one of the most powerful Avengers by raw output. He is also the one whose power has, from the cave in Afghanistan onward, always been a thing he was building because he was afraid of what would happen if he stopped. The suit was the answer to a question he could not quite articulate. The snap is the answer to the question he finally could. He dies with the most advanced personal weapon system in the universe wrapped around his arm and his hand bare on Pepper's cheek. The show is not being subtle about what it is doing in that frame. There is a quieter detail in Tony's ranking that the suits and the snap and the battles tend to obscure, which is that for most of his on-screen life, he is the only member of the team whose personal infrastructure is also the team's infrastructure. The Avengers Tower in Manhattan is his. The compound upstate is his. The transport jets are his. Jarvis, Friday, and the entire networked intelligence layer the team relies on for tactical analysis is his. The Iron Man suits that Rhodey wears are his. The Spider-Man suit that Peter wears is his. The Falcon Red Wing drone is his. The Hulkbuster armor that Bruce sometimes operates is his. The team, in its operational form, is a kind of distributed manifestation of his anxiety. When he is gone, in the closing minutes of Endgame, the team has to rebuild its infrastructure from sources he no longer provides, and the post-Endgame films, particularly The Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Hawkeye, treat that transition as a noticeable shift in how the team gets things done. Sam, in his new Wakandan suit, is operating on technology Tony did not design. Kate Bishop, in her improvised heroism, is working with equipment Tony was no longer alive to provide. The team is moving forward. It is also, in a way that is felt rather than stated, learning how to operate without the man whose engineering held the previous era together. The ranking places him here for his combat output. The closing arc of the franchise is the show telling you that his actual position on the team was always a function of what he was building, not what he was wearing. That places him above Steve in raw output and below the next entry, which is the character whose power source is not technological at all, and whose ranking on this list begins the move into the upper tier where the rules of physics start to apply differently. Thor Odinson, the god of thunder, is the first character on this ranking whose power is not derived from technology, training, or human enhancement, and the gap between him and Iron Man is the first genuinely large step on this list. He is introduced in Thor, released in May of 2011, banished from Asgard by his father Odin for arrogance, and stripped of his powers as a kind of moral lesson, sent to Earth as essentially a mortal until he can prove himself worthy of his hammer Mjolnir. The film stages the entire premise as a fish-out-of-water comedy in which a literal god has to learn humility by working in a small New Mexico town. The hammer, planted in the desert nearby, can only be lifted by someone worthy of it. He is not worthy at the start of the film. He becomes worthy by the end. The hammer flies into his hand. His full powers return. The Asgardian armor materializes around him. The film is, on the surface, a coming-of-age story. Underneath it, it is the franchise telling you exactly what kind of being has just joined the lineup. His native power set, even before any of the upgrades the films give him across the next 10 years, is enormous. He is an Asgardian, which the films describe as a being from a higher dimensional realm whose biology is closer to a deity than to a human. He has strength sufficient to throw cars, deflect bullets, and trade blows with the Hulk. He has durability sufficient to survive direct strikes from energy weapons. He has a lifespan measured in millennia. The films casually imply, across his appearances, that he is well over 1,000 years old. By Thor: Love and Thunder, released in July of 2022, his age has been pushed deeper into that long Asgardian arc, although the films are deliberately loose with the exact number. His core combat capability, in his early films, is tied to Mjolnir. The hammer is forged from a metal called Uru, mined from the heart of a dying star, and enchanted by Odin to be wielded only by one worthy of its power. It allows Thor to fly by throwing the hammer and being pulled along behind it. It allows him to summon and direct lightning, channeling the storm itself as a weapon. It allows him to deflect projectiles, return to his hand from any distance, and amplify the force of his blows to levels that would otherwise be impossible. The hammer is, in narrative terms, an extension of his will. When he is uncertain, it does not respond. When he is committed, it can knock a frost giant across a courtyard with a single swing. Thor: Ragnarok, released in November of 2017, is the film that begins to redefine his power set in the direction it ultimately reaches. The plot of that film centers on his sister Hela, the goddess of death, returning to Asgard after centuries of banishment to claim the throne. In their first confrontation, on a Bifrost bridge above the earth, she catches Mjolnir mid-flight and crushes it in her hand. The hammer shatters. Thor is, for the first time in his on-screen life, without it. He is captured, shipped to the planet Sakaar, fights Hulk in the Grandmaster's arena, escapes, and returns to Asgard for the climactic battle. During that battle, on the verge of being killed by Hela, he has a vision of Odin who tells him, essentially, that the hammer was never the source of his power. The hammer was the focus. Thor, the god of thunder, is what was always the source. He opens his eyes. Lightning explodes from his body. He proceeds to clear an entire courtyard of Hela's undead army, using only his hands and the storm. That sequence is the show telling you, in a single visual, that the upper bound of his power has been understated for 6 films. The hammer was a training tool. Without it, his output is, if anything, larger. He has internalized the connection to the storm in a way that bypasses the focusing object entirely. The follow-up is Avengers: Infinity War in April of 2018, in which Thanos throws the surviving Asgardian refugee ship into wreckage in the opening sequence, kills Loki in front of him, and leaves Thor floating in space. He is rescued by the Guardians of the Galaxy. He proceeds, over the course of the next hour of film, to travel to Nidavellir, the world of the dwarves, and persuade them to forge a new weapon for him. The weapon is Stormbreaker, an axe with a hammerhead, made of the same Uru metal as Mjolnir but larger, more powerful, and capable of opening the Bifrost on its own without need for the Asgardian gate. He arrives on the battlefield in Wakanda with the new weapon. He proceeds to wipe out Outrider waves at a rate the rest of the team cannot match. He throws Stormbreaker through Thanos' chest, and the film holds on Thanos, the most powerful being the franchise has produced up to that point. with the axe embedded in him and surprise crossing his face. And then Thanos, still alive, says the famous line about how Thor should have aimed for the head. He snaps. Half the universe dies. That sequence settles part of Thor's ranking. He is, by Stormbreaker-era output, capable of physically defeating Thanos in single combat. He had the kill. He chose the wound. The show does not let him forget it. Avengers Endgame opens with him executing the snap erasing Thanos at the start of the film, in a sequence where the team locates Thanos on a remote planet weeks after the original snap, only to discover that Thanos has used the stones to destroy the stones themselves. Thor, in that moment, picks up Stormbreaker, walks over to the kneeling Thanos, and beheads him. The execution does not bring back the dust. Thor spends the next 5 years in the small coastal village of New Asgard, on the Norwegian shore near Tønsberg, in a kind of grief-shrouded depression, drinking, gaining weight, and refusing to leave a self-exile he believes he deserves. The Endgame Thor is, in raw power terms, still in the same tier. He still can summon Mjolnir, which he discovers during the time heist when his past self's hammer recognizes him as worthy. He still can channel the storm. The film stages a moment in which he, Steve, and Iron Man face Thanos together in the final battle, and Thor is fighting with Stormbreaker in one hand and Mjolnir in the other, dual-wielding two of the most powerful weapons in the cosmos. The choreography of that fight is the show telling you that he is, by raw output, the strongest pure combatant on the field. What places him here on the ranking, rather than at the absolute top, is that the entries above him include beings whose power sets do things that brute cosmic force cannot do. Thor can flatten an army. He cannot rewrite probability. He can summon lightning from the heart of a neutron star. He cannot bend reality. The list is going to get into beings who can do both. And his placement here, just below the next entry, is the show's acknowledgement that there is a class of power above his, and that he, despite being a literal god, is not at the top of it. The post-Endgame films, Thor: Love and Thunder in particular, continue to refine and complicate his character, but do not significantly shift his power placement. The film introduces Mighty Thor, in which his former love Jane Foster, dying of cancer, wields a reassembled Mjolnir and takes on a portion of his power. The film also introduces Gore the God Butcher, a being whose necrosword can kill gods, and the central question of the film becomes what Thor's responsibility is to the universe of divinities whose existence he has spent most of his life taking for granted. His power across that film is intact, but emotionally exhausted. He spends most of it without his beard, with his hair short again, in a leaner physical configuration than the Endgame version. His ranking placement is set by Stormbreaker and reinforced by his cumulative capability across all of his appearances. He is the strongest pure combatant on the team in terms of raw force output. He is one of the only beings on the team who has been shown to survive on the surface of a neutron star while channeling its energy. He is the founding member of the Avengers whose power scale is closest to genuinely cosmic. He is also, by his own grief and his own restraint, the one who has chosen on multiple occasions to use less than his full output, because using it would mean accepting losses he is not ready to accept. The placement at this position is the show being precise about him. He is not the most powerful Avenger. He is the most powerful Avenger whose power can still be described in physical terms. That brings the list to the next entry, which is the first character on the ranking whose power is something the franchise built from scratch, and whose source is itself one of the Infinity Stones that the rest of the films have spent so much time trying to keep out of the wrong hands. Vision is, in many ways, the most carefully placed entry on this entire ranking, because his power profile is hybrid in a way that no other character on the list shares. He is introduced in Avengers: Age of Ultron, released in May of 2015, born in the final act of that film after Ultron has uploaded his consciousness into a synthetic vibranium body that Tony Stark and Bruce Banner have inadvertently helped construct. The body is hijacked by the Avengers before Ultron can take it, and Jarvis, Tony's original AI, is uploaded into it instead. The Mind Stone, one of the 6 Infinity Stones, is embedded in the forehead of the body. The hammer Mjolnir is placed on his chest during the birth sequence, and when he stands up, He picks the hammer up and hands it back to Thor, a moment that the film uses as a kind of immediate certification of his worthiness and of the strangeness of what has just been created. His power set is unique in the franchise. He has a synthetic body made of vibranium, which gives him a base level of durability comparable to the strongest natural materials in the universe. He has the ability to alter his density at will, which the films show in two directions. He can become intangible, passing through walls and through other physical objects, including through living beings without harming them. He can become so dense that physical attacks on him are absorbed and dissipated, and that his own weight, when he lands on a surface, can crush it. He can fly. He has superhuman strength, sufficient to engage with the highest-tier physical combatants on the team. He projects energy beams from the Mind Stone in his forehead, and those beams have been shown to cut through nearly any material the franchise has produced. He has a fully integrated artificial intelligence based on Jarvis, which gives him processing speed and tactical analysis that the rest of the team simply does not have. What complicates his ranking, and what elevates him above Thor in some categories while leaving him below in others, is the Mind Stone itself. The stone is one of the 6 Infinity Stones, the fundamental building blocks of the universe in the cosmology the films have built. Each stone embodies a fundamental aspect of reality. The Mind Stone embodies, as its name suggests, mind, consciousness, mental influence. In Vision's possession, the stone is not used to its full potential, in part because Vision is, by his own choice, restrained. He is one of the most powerful beings in the franchise. He chooses to act with the gentleness of a thoughtful person who has only been alive for a few months and is still working out what kind of being he wants to be. His combat appearances are limited but telling. In Captain America: Civil War, he takes the field during the airport battle in Leipzig, and his contribution is to walk slowly into the middle of the conflict and draw a line in the dirt that the opposing team is not permitted to cross. When they cross it anyway, he attempts to incapacitate Falcon and accidentally hits Rhodey instead in the misfire that breaks Rhodey's spine. The film stages his guilt afterward as one of the most subdued moments of any character's emotional aftermath. He does not rage, he does not weep. He simply stands at Rhodey's bedside looking at the man whose life he has irrevocably changed and says nothing. In Avengers: Infinity War, his power set is most directly tested. He spends the first half of the film in Edinburgh with Wanda, living under cover names, attempting to have a relationship that the rest of the world does not know about. They are attacked by Proxima Midnight and Corvus Glaive, 2 of Thanos' Black Order. Vision, attempting to project his energy beam at Corvus, is impaled by Corvus's own glaive, a weapon that has been forged specifically to penetrate the durability of beings like him. He survives, but is wounded in a way that he cannot fully repair on his own. The rest of the film is, in a sense, an extended sequence in which the Avengers attempt to figure out how to remove the Mind Stone from his forehead without killing him. They take him to Wakanda. Shuri attempts the procedure. Thanos arrives before she can complete it. Wanda, in the climactic moments, destroys the stone herself in order to deny Thanos his goal. The blast also destroys Vision. Thanos then uses the Time Stone to reverse time and bring Vision back to life, only to immediately rip the Mind Stone out of his forehead and kill him a second time, this time in a way Wanda is forced to watch. The death is, in narrative terms, one of the most layered moments in the entire franchise. Vision is destroyed twice in the span of a few minutes, once by the woman who loves him and once by the being she was trying to deny it to. The show is not subtle about what it is doing in that sequence. It is asking you to consider what kind of power the Mind Stone actually represents, given that the being who holds it can be killed by simply removing the stone from his body. The implication, never quite stated, is that Vision's power is not Vision's. It is the stone's, channeled through him. He is, in this sense, the only Avenger whose body and power source are detachable. WandaVision, the Disney Plus series released in January of 2021, deepens his ranking by introducing a second version of him. White Vision, a body reconstructed by Sword from Vision's original remains, without the Mind Stone, with the original synthetic body intact, and Vision's original neural pattern installed into it. The series stages a confrontation between this white vision and the hex vision that Wanda has created inside her grief construct, and the two of them resolve their relationship not through combat but through a philosophical exchange about the ship of Theseus and the question of whether either of them is the original. The white vision absorbs the memories of the hex vision and flies away. The series leaves his ultimate fate unresolved, which is the show being honest that his power set is, more than any other Avengers, dependent on questions about identity that the rest of the franchise has not really considered. What this places him at, on the list, is just above Thor in versatility and just below the next entry in raw output. Vision can phase through matter, which Thor cannot. Vision can project the focused beam of a Mind Stone, which Thor cannot. Vision can think at processor speeds, which Thor cannot. What Thor can do that Vision cannot, in his standard combat configurations, is generate the kind of raw energy output that flattens an army in a single discharge. The ranking is finely cut. The two of them are, in practical terms, very close to equivalent. Vision is placed here because his Mind Stone variant grants him a category of capability that Thor's lightning, for all its scale, does not match. The next entry on this list is the first character whose power set genuinely operates on a different physical principle from anything below him on the ranking, and whose placement at this position is the show acknowledging that magic, in the franchise it has been building, is not a different word for technology. It is a different layer of reality. Stephen Strange, Doctor Strange, the master of the mystic arts, is introduced in Doctor Strange, released in November of 2016. The character, before he becomes a sorcerer, is a wealthy, brilliant, and unbearably arrogant neurosurgeon who specializes in surgical interventions that almost no other surgeon in the world will attempt. He is good at his job to a degree that the film stages as borderline supernatural. He memorizes patient histories, he runs operating rooms with a precision that approaches choreography. He treats his colleagues with the casual contempt of a man who believes that no one in the room is on his level. And then, in the opening act of the film, he drives off a cliff in a sports car while taking a phone call, and the nerve damage to his hands ends his career in a single sequence. The film follows him through the consequences. He spends his savings on every experimental procedure available. None of them work. His hands shake. He cannot hold a scalpel. He turns to a former patient named Jonathan Pangborn, who tells him that he was cured of his own paralysis, not by medicine, but by something he found in a monastery in Kathmandu called Kamar Taj. Strange travels there. He finds the Ancient One, the sorcerer who runs the place. He is, in his first meeting with her, dismissive of the idea that any of this can be real. The Ancient One responds by pushing his astral form out of his body, sending him through dimensions of reality that human consciousness was not designed to perceive, and then dropping him back into his body with the simple instruction to teach him. His power set, accordingly, is enormous and structured around a system the franchise calls the mystic arts. Practitioners of the arts can draw energy from other dimensions and shape it into spells. The spells include physical constructs, such as the eldritch whips that he uses for offensive combat. They include sling rings, which create circular portals through which a practitioner can travel instantly to any location they can visualize clearly. They include the mirror dimension, a parallel layer of reality that practitioners can pull adversaries into so that any damage done there does not affect the standard world. They include levitation, telekinesis, energy projection, time manipulation, dimensional travel, and a long list of secondary applications that the films introduce in fragments. Strange's specific equipment elevates his combat profile further. He wears the Cloak of Levitation, a sentient cloak that selects him as its wielder, allows him to fly, and intervenes independently in combat to protect him from threats he is not aware of. He carries the Eye of Agamotto, a pendant containing the Time Stone, which allows him to rewind, fast forward, and loop sections of time at will. He has access to the Book of the Vishanti and to the collected spellwork of the Masters of the Mystic Arts, which is in effect an enormous library of techniques developed over centuries. By Avengers Infinity War, he has become the master of the New York Sanctum and one of the 3 most senior sorcerers on Earth. His combat appearances are concentrated and carefully chosen, The climactic confrontation in his solo film pits him against Dormammu, a being from the dark dimension whose power scale is greater than anything the franchise had shown to that point. Strange's solution to the encounter is not to fight Dormammu directly. He uses the Time Stone to trap them both in a time loop. He arrives in the dark dimension. Dormammu kills him. Time resets. Strange arrives again. Dormammu kills him again. The loop continues. Strange dies, repeatedly, for what the film implies is a subjective duration of millions of cycles, until Dormammu, who exists outside of time and is therefore experiencing the loop as inescapable rather than as repetition, finally agrees to leave Earth alone in exchange for Strange ending the loop. It is one of the most unusual victories in any superhero film. The hero wins by losing, over and over, until losing becomes unsupportable for the villain. That sequence sets the template for how the franchise uses him. He does not punch his way out of fights. He thinks his way out. Avengers Infinity War puts him into the most extreme version of this. On the planet Titan, after the rest of the team have arrived, he uses the Time Stone to view the possible futures of the confrontation with Thanos. The film states the number: 14,605 futures. He sees them all. He returns to his body. Tony asks him how many of them they win. He says 1. The film then proceeds, over the next hour of runtime, to lose. Thanos defeats them on Titan. Strange surrenders the Time Stone to him in exchange for Tony's life. The snap happens. Strange, in the moment before his own dust takes him, tells Tony that this was the only way. The line is the show telling you, with complete clarity, that the most powerful intelligence in the room had calculated that the path to victory required everything that just happened, including the death of half of all life, including, eventually, the death of Tony, including 5 years of suffering for the survivors. He saw all 14 million possible futures, and the only winning one had this shape. That is not a normal power. That is a power category that, on this list, only a handful of beings can approach. He has not just access to the Time Stone in that sequence. He has the ability to use it to scan probability space and identify outcomes. The film is, in effect, telling you that he has read the script. He has seen what is going to happen. He cannot tell anyone, because telling them might change their behavior in ways that close off the only winning path. He carries the knowledge alone, all the way to the snap. His endgame appearance is brief, but functionally enormous. He uses sling rings to open the portals through which every reinforcement arrives at the final battle. Wakandan forces, the Ravagers, every hero in the universe, all arrive because Strange has opened a doorway for them. During the battle, in the chaos, Tony catches his eye from across the field, and Strange raises one finger. The single winning path. Tony understands. He goes for the gauntlet. He performs the snap. He dies. The team wins. His follow-up film, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, released in May of 2022, expands his power profile in directions the franchise had only hinted at. He learns to project his consciousness into the bodies of variants of himself across the multiverse, including, in the climactic act, into the body of his own corpse, which he reanimates and uses as a combat platform on the soul level. He fights a corrupted Scarlet Witch through multiple realities. He acquires, by the end of the film, a third eye on his forehead, which the film implies is the result of his use of the Darkhold, a corrupting magical text that the Scarlet Witch has been using throughout the film for her own purposes. The third eye is presented as a warning. He has crossed a line. The film does not yet show what the consequences will be. What this places him at, on the ranking, is just above Vision. He has reality manipulation, he has time manipulation, he has dimensional travel, he has astral projection, and he has, in the cloak and the eye, equipment that essentially nobody else on the team can match. What keeps him from being higher is that his power set, while enormously broad, is not the absolute upper bound of the franchise's cosmology. Above him on this list are two beings whose power is more focused, more brutal, and harder to design around. He is the smartest combatant on the team. He is, by a significant margin, the most strategically powerful entry on this list. The two entries above him are the two entries who, in a direct confrontation, could destroy him through sheer force before he had time to set up the strategy that would save him. His ranking deserves one more pause because the franchise has, in his solo films and in his appearances across the team films, been quietly building a distinction between two kinds of power that the rest of the list does not really capture. There is the power of force, which most of the entries on this ranking are organized around, and there is the power of pattern recognition, which Strange is the principal example of. The Time Stone is not, in his hands, a weapon. It is an instrument for observing causality. When he scans the 14 million possible futures on Titan, he is not running combat simulations. He is reading the multiverse for the single thread that leads to a survivable outcome. That capability, taken seriously, is a category of power the franchise has produced almost nowhere else. Even Wanda's chaos magic, which sits above his on this list, does not include the ability to read forward in time across all possible branches. Her power is, in its purest expression, the ability to change what is. His is, in its purest expression, the ability to see what could be. The two of them, when they collide in Multiverse of Madness, are essentially the franchise's two strongest characters pitted against each other in a fight whose outcome is determined more by character than by combat capability. He cannot defeat her by force. He defeats her, or rather she defeats herself, by guiding her toward the moment of self-recognition that pulls her back from the corruption. The fact that the film stages the resolution this way, rather than as a straight combat win, is the show being explicit about how it understands his power. Strategy is not subordinate to force in the franchise's cosmology. It is, in some matchups, the only thing that can answer force at all. That brings the list to the penultimate entry, which is the character whose power source comes from outside the Earth entirely and whose combat output is, by any honest measurement, on a scale that the rest of the team has spent years declining to fully engage with. Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, is the second most powerful Avenger on this entire list, and her placement at this position, rather than at the top, is going to be controversial in some quarters, so the explanation needs to be careful. She is introduced in Captain Marvel, released in March of 2019, with a backstory that takes place primarily in the mid-1990s, and that explains her origin in fragments. She was a United States Air Force pilot. She was assigned to a classified project led by Dr. Wendy Lawson, who was secretly an alien from a race called the Kree. The project was attempting to develop a faster-than-light engine using a power source called the Tesseract, which the franchise has by this point established as the housing for the Space Stone. During an attempted test flight, the engine was destroyed by Kree forces who wanted the technology for themselves. Carol, attempting to deny them the engine, fired her sidearm into the energy core. The resulting explosion blasted her with raw Space Stone energy. She survived. She emerged from the wreckage with her body permanently altered, capable of absorbing and channeling enormous quantities of energy, and the Kree, immediately after, took her into their custody. The first half of her solo film deals with the consequences of that capture. She is told that she was always Kree, that the Earth memories are a fabrication, and that her name is Vers. She is trained as a Kree warrior. She is fitted with an implant in her neck that limits her power output, ostensibly for her own safety, but in practice to keep her useful as a weapon for the Kree Empire's wars against the Skrulls. The Skrulls, in this film, turn out to be refugees rather than aggressors, and the Kree's framing of them is a lie. Over the course of the film, she discovers her true identity, locates the people who knew her on Earth before the accident, and reaches the moment of her self-actualization in the climactic act, when she removes the inhibitor implant from her neck and lets the full output of her power finally show. That sequence is the show telling you what she actually is. The inhibited version of her, the one the Kree have been deploying for 6 years, can fly, can absorb and redirect energy, can project plasma blasts from her hands, and can survive in vacuum. The uninhibited version, the one the film reveals in its final act, can do all of that at a scale that simply does not have an analog in the rest of the franchise, outside of the very top of this list. She flies through warships. She destroys ballistic missiles from intercontinental range. She powers her own flight at speeds the Kree's own ships cannot match. She is, by the end of her solo film, a being who is operating at a power tier that the Avengers have never had access to before. Her appearance in Avengers Endgame is, accordingly, transformative. She arrives at the Avengers compound carrying Tony Stark and Nebula's drifting spacecraft, which she has located in deep space and towed back to Earth using essentially her own body as the propulsion system. She tells the team when they ask her how she found them that she heard a distress signal across the galaxy. She joins the council that decides to hunt Thanos. She participates in the execution of Thanos at the start of the film, although Thor delivers the killing blow. And then she leaves Earth, because the snap has destabilized other systems she is needed to defend, and she does not return until the final battle. When she returns, she does so by flying through the Sanctuary 2, Thanos' flagship, in a single trajectory that destroys the ship from the inside. She arrives on the battlefield in the final act. She takes the Gauntlet from Spider-Man. She begins moving it across the field toward the time travel platform that the team needs to send the stones away. She is intercepted by Thanos. She and Thanos engage directly for a brief but extraordinary sequence in which she absorbs his strikes, headbutts him, and proceeds to slowly close her hand around the Power Stone in his gauntlet. The only being on the field in that moment who has been shown to be able to physically resist his strength. The sequence is short. Thanos breaks the engagement by ripping the Power Stone out of the gauntlet and using it to punch her across the battlefield. She goes down, she gets back up, she remains in the fight. That confrontation is the show telling you in choreography that she is in his weight class. The fact that he requires the active use of an Infinity Stone to put her down for even a few seconds is the show being explicit. The rest of the team, in that same battle, are scrambling to keep him from completing his objective. Carol is the one who is, by herself, capable of contesting his physical presence at the highest level. Her ranking just below the top entry is therefore the result of a careful calculation rather than an obvious tier difference. She has the highest raw energy output of any combat-capable Avenger. She has the highest flight speed. She has the highest physical durability against non-magical attacks. She has, in her binary form, an output that the films have implied is sufficient to destroy entire warships. What keeps her one rung below the absolute top is that her power set, while enormous, is still a single category. She projects energy, she absorbs energy, she moves at extreme speeds. The being above her on this list does something else entirely. Her appearances in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, in Ms. Marvel, and in the Marvels released in November of 2023, refine her character and explore the consequences of her absence from Earth for the long stretches between Avengers events. The Marvels in particular puts her in close interaction with two younger heroes, Monica Rambeau, the daughter of her closest friend, and Kamala Khan, a Jersey City teenager who has idolized her since childhood. The film is the show putting the most powerful Avenger of her tier in conversation with the consequences of the years she has spent off Earth fixing other systems. She has been an absent figure. The film is asking her to be a present one. The arc completes by the end of the film, with her relocating to be closer to Kamala's family on Earth. What this means for her placement on this ranking is that she occupies the second position with the kind of stable confidence that very few characters on the list have. She is the most powerful Avenger whose power output can still be plotted on a standard cosmic energy scale. Above her is the one whose power output stops being meaningfully describable in those terms at all. There is one more observation about her that the ranking should pause on, because her ranking and her actual screen time are in a kind of inverse relationship that the show is quietly aware of. She has fewer total appearances than nearly every other Avenger above the mid-tier of this list, and her presence in the team is, more than any other heavy hitter, a function of where she is choosing not to be. She is, by her own decision, off Earth for most of the post-Endgame era. She is dealing with crises in star systems that nobody else on the team has even visited. Her arc, if you trace it across her solo film, her Endgame appearance, and her appearance in the Marvels in 2023, is the arc of someone whose power is so large that the question of where to deploy it becomes a moral problem with no easy answer. If she stays on Earth, The rest of the galaxy is undefended. If she stays in the galaxy, Earth has to handle problems that her presence would resolve in seconds. The show does not pretend that the math here works out neatly. It just lets her live inside the choice, returning when the stakes are large enough to justify it and leaving when they are not. The ranking places her at the second position by output. The show is, in a quieter way, telling you that the second most powerful Avenger is also the second most absent, and that the two facts are connected. Power on this scale comes with a kind of distance from the people you are protecting, and the protectee, in the long run, may notice the distance more than the protection. The most powerful Avenger in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe is Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, and the explanation of why she sits at the top of this list is going to take longer than any other entry, because her power is more difficult to describe in conventional terms, and because her arc is the most psychologically complete one the franchise has produced for a character of her tier. She is introduced in Avengers Age of Ultron, released in May of 2015, in a brief post-credits scene at the end of Captain America: The Winter Soldier the previous year. In the original framing, she and her twin brother Pietro are Sokovian volunteers who have submitted themselves to Hydra experiments using the Mind Stone, in the form of the scepter that Loki carried in the Avengers. The experiments have given them powers. Pietro has superhuman speed. Wanda has, the film tells you in fragments, the ability to manipulate energy, induce hallucinations, and move objects with her mind. The film treats her, in this introduction, as a moderately powerful telekinetic, with some additional capabilities that the team will eventually find ways to handle. That framing is the show being deceptive. The reveal that the rest of the franchise will spend years uncovering, as far as the films and the series have pieced it together, is that the Mind Stone did not give Wanda her powers. The Mind Stone unlocked powers that were already inside her. She was born with the dormant potential to be the Scarlet Witch, a being identified across multiple magical traditions as a sorcerer whose abilities exceed any other practitioner of the mystic arts because she does not work spells in the standard way. She does chaos magic, which is the ability to alter probability and reality directly, without the need for the spell structures that other sorcerers, including Doctor Strange, depend on. That information is not delivered in Age of Ultron. It is delivered in fragments across Captain America: Civil War in 2016, Avengers: Infinity War in 2018, Avengers: Endgame in 2019, the WandaVision Disney Plus series in January and February of 2021, and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness in May of 2022. The arc, taken in full, is the show telling you that the moderately powerful telekinetic from Age of Ultron was always, in the underlying reality of the franchise, the most powerful being on the planet, and that everyone, including her, has been operating under a misunderstanding of what she actually is. The first hints come in Civil War. During the airport battle in Leipzig, she lifts entire stacks of cars with a single gesture and uses them as projectiles against the opposing team. During the battle, she also uses her telekinetic ability defensively to constrict the chest of Vision, forcing him through several floors of a building and pinning him in the basement. The fact that she can physically restrain Vision, whose synthetic vibranium body is supposed to be virtually unbreakable, is the show telling you something the rest of the team does not yet understand. She is not in his weight class because of energy output. She is in his weight class because she can simply tell physics what to do. By Avengers: Infinity War, the show has elevated her substantially. She is one of the most active combatants in the Wakanda battle. She holds back the entire wave of Outriders attempting to flank Vision while Shuri attempts to remove the Mind Stone. She holds back the Black Order in close combat. And then, in the most loaded sequence of her entire pre-WandaVision arc, she is forced to make a decision the show has been building toward for 2 films. With Thanos arriving and the procedure on Vision unfinished, she is faced with the choice of destroying Vision herself, by destroying the Mind Stone, in order to deny Thanos the final piece of the Gauntlet. She does it. The film stages the moment with extreme care. Vision tells her, essentially, that it is all right. He tells her he loves her. She tells him she loves him, and she puts her hand to the Mind Stone and tears it apart, and the explosion destroys him from the inside. The film holds on her face in the silence afterward. And then Thanos walks up, uses the time stone to reverse what she just did, and kills Vision again in front of her. Then he snaps. She turns to dust along with half the universe. The dust is, in a real sense, the only mercy she gets in that film. The 5 years between Infinity War and Endgame, the years she does not exist for, are years in which the rest of the surviving Avengers are processing their grief. She gets to skip them. When she comes back at the end of Endgame, she comes back to a world in which Vision is permanently dead, in which the woman who killed him for the first time is still her, and in which the team she belongs to is about to lose its leadership in the final battle. Her appearance in the final battle is brief but extraordinary. She finds Thanos directly. The two of them have a short exchange. Thanos, who has not met this version of her, asks her who she is. She tells him, essentially, that he took everything from her. He says, almost dismissively, that he does not even know who she is. She says, with no escalation in her voice, that he will. And then she proceeds, in front of his entire army, to lift him off the ground with her bare hands, using nothing but her powers, to dismantle his armor piece by piece, and to begin to crush him in midair. Thanos, watching the woman who is currently killing him, gives the order to his ground forces to fire artillery on his own position rather than allow her to finish. The artillery barrage forces her to disengage. She survives. He survives. The show is very clear about what it just showed you. With approximately 1 minute of uninterrupted opportunity, the Scarlet Witch had the most powerful villain in the franchise's history reduced to a man begging for fire on his own location. That is not a normal power. That is the show telling you, with the full weight of its largest action sequence, that the previous 14 films have undersold her by a substantial margin. There is a small detail in the endgame sequence that the ranking should sit with for a moment, because it tells you something about how the show wants you to understand her power. At the point in the battle when she has Thanos lifted into the air and is beginning to crush him, she does not speak in fragments or scream or perform the action with the kind of effort that the rest of the team's heavy hitters typically display when they are working at the top of their output. She does it with a level of focus that the choreography is careful to render as almost calm. Her hands are open, her face is still. The energy around her is red but contained. The implication, which the show never spells out, is that what she is doing in that moment is not even close to her ceiling. She is destroying the most powerful being the franchise has produced, and she is doing it the way a person closes a door that has been left open too long. The villain on screen is the Mad Titan. The hero on screen is doing housekeeping. That is the gap that the rest of this list does not include. WandaVision, the Disney Plus series that follows, is the show finally explaining what it has been showing. The series is set a few weeks after Endgame. Wanda, alone and grieving and unable to process Vision's death a third time, drives to a plot of land in Westview, New Jersey, where Vision had purchased a property before his death with the idea of one day building a house there for the two of them. She stands in the empty lot. She begins, without consciously planning it, to weep, and the energy of her grief reshapes the entire town. The houses become a 1950s sitcom set. The residents become characters in the show she is unconsciously creating. Vision is reconstructed inside the construct, made from her memories and her magic, and given a life with her. 2 children, Billy and Tommy, are produced inside the construct, born from her magic in the form of a sitcom pregnancy. For 9 episodes, she lives inside an evolving series of television formats, with her dead husband and her created children, and the residents of Westview live as supporting cast in her fantasy, their own personalities suppressed by her grief. The series treats this with extreme seriousness. It is, on the surface, a sitcom parody that moves through the formats of every American sitcom decade in sequence. Underneath, it is the story of a woman whose power is so large that her grief, simply allowed to express itself, can rewrite a town. The residents are not props. They are people. They are aware, inside the construct, that they are being puppeted. They cannot speak about it. They cannot leave. They are conscripted into an unconscious woman's healing process. And the show, by the time it gets to the final 2 episodes, is asking the question of whether her grief gives her the moral right to do what she is doing. The answer, as the show develops it, is that it does not. She eventually understands what she has done. She agrees to dismantle the construct. The series ends with her releasing the residents, watching her children and her created vision dissolve in her arms, and walking away into the night, no longer the Wanda Maximoff who began the series. The series also gives her, in its penultimate episode, the formal name she has been carrying without knowing it. The witch Agatha Harkness, an antagonist who has been impersonating one of the Westview residents in order to investigate Wanda's power, identifies her, in a moment that the series stages as a kind of grim coronation, as the Scarlet Witch. The Witch of Prophecy, the being whose power is greater than the Sorcerer Supreme's. The figure that the Darkhold, an ancient corrupting magical text, has been waiting for. Wanda, by the end of the series, has accepted the name and has, in the final scene, begun to study the Darkhold in order to learn how to find her children, who she now believes exist somewhere in the multiverse. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, released in May of 2022, is the show following through on that decision. Wanda, in that film, is the antagonist. She has been corrupted by the Darkhold. She is willing to murder a young woman named America Chavez, who has the ability to travel between universes, in order to gain that ability for herself and use it to find a reality where her children exist. The film is, on the surface, a horror film. Wanda, throughout it, kills sorcerers by the dozen. She destroys Kamar Taj in an extended sequence. She takes over the body of a variant of herself in another universe and uses it to attempt to murder her variant's children, which is the moment in the film where the version of her remaining inside the corruption finally realizes what she has become. Her combat output in that film is, by any sober measurement, beyond anything any other Avenger has demonstrated. She fights Strange and the entire collected staff of Kamar Taj simultaneously and kills most of them. She walks through magical defenses that are designed to repel beings of her tier without slowing down. She destroys the body of a Captain Marvel variant by lifting a statue off its pedestal and crushing the variant under it with no apparent effort. The film stages a sequence in which the Illuminati, a council of the most powerful heroes of an alternative reality, including a variant of Charles Xavier, a variant of Mr. Fantastic, a variant of Captain Marvel, a variant of Black Bolt, a variant of Captain Carter, and a variant of Carl Mordo, attempt to detain her in their headquarters. She kills nearly all of them in a single sequence. Black Bolt, whose voice is so powerful it can destroy planets, dies when she causes his own mouth to disappear, so that his voice has nowhere to go, and destroys him from the inside. Mr. Fantastic, whose stretching abilities make him almost impossible to physically restrain, is reduced to ribbons in a single gesture. The film does not slow down to acknowledge how impossible this is, it just shows you what she can do. The film also gives her, at the climax, the moment of self-recognition that brings her back. She is about to take the body of her variant and rule the variant's family. The variant's children scream at the sight of her. They beg her to leave. They run from her. And the corrupted Wanda, looking down at two children who are terrified of her, the version of herself who was supposed to be their mother, sees what she has become. She turns. She walks out of the variant's house. She returns to her own reality, alone, and she destroys the Darkhold in every universe simultaneously, which requires her to also destroy Mount Wundagore, the temple of the Scarlet Witch, in another reality where the Darkhold has been engraved into stone. The temple collapses on her. The film ends with the implication that she may not have survived. Her power, as the multiverse film leaves it, is at a level the franchise has not produced for any other character. She has done things in that film that, if you accept them at face value, indicate that she could in principle dismantle most of the cast of this list with relatively little effort. Doctor Strange, the previous entry on this list, is shown in the film to be substantially out of his depth against her. Captain Marvel, the entry just below her on this list, exists in the film only as a variant who Wanda kills in the Illuminati sequence. The hierarchy of power that the rest of this list has been building is, by the end of Multiverse of Madness, fully exposed. She is at the top. The rest of the team is, in a category sense, below her by a margin that the show is not trying to soften. What separates her from Captain Marvel is the type of power, not just the magnitude. Carol can deliver enormous quantities of energy. Wanda can decide that energy does not apply. Carol can fly through warships. Wanda can decide that the warships were never built. Carol's power, however great, operates within the standard physics of the universe. Wanda's, in its chaos magic configuration, operates on the rules of the universe themselves. The Westview construct is the demonstration. She did not, in that series, do anything that the universe's normal laws would call possible. She rewrote the laws for the area she was in. The series is very explicit about this. What places her at the absolute top of this list, beyond even those displays, is the cumulative effect of everything the franchise has shown her doing. She held back the entire Outrider wave at Wakanda. She destroyed the Mind Stone, which is one of the 6 fundamental constants of the universe, with her bare hands. She nearly killed Thanos in single combat. She constructed an entire town's worth of reality in Westview, populated it with simulated people, and sustained it for weeks. She defeated the Illuminati in a single sequence. She destroyed the Darkhold across every reality simultaneously. She is, by every measurement this list has been applying, the most powerful Avenger the Marvel Cinematic Universe has ever produced. The placement is also the show being honest about something it has been quietly acknowledging since Age of Ultron. The first time she meets the team, in 2015, Pietro is the one introduced as the high-speed one, and Wanda is the one introduced as the support character. By 2022, Pietro is dead. The support character is the most powerful being on Earth, and the team has, in effect, lost the ability to control her without her cooperation. The show does not present this as a problem to be solved through escalation. It presents it as the natural outcome of a power level the team did not understand it had inherited. She was not, ever, a moderately powered telekinetic. She was always the Scarlet Witch. The team simply did not realize until she did. The final irony of her ranking is that her power, like Captain America's, is in the end a function of her character rather than just her capacity. She is the most powerful Avenger. She is also the one whose use of that power has been, for the most part, restrained. The Westview construct was an accident. The Wakanda fight was defense. The Mind Stone destruction was an act of grief and necessity. The Multiverse of Madness rampage was the only sustained period in her entire arc in which she used her full power offensively, and the show treats that period as a tragic deviation rather than as a triumphant arrival. By the end of that film, she has, in effect, ended her own villain run by recognizing what she has become and removing the corrupting object that allowed it. Whether she survived is left unanswered. What she could have done, had she chosen not to stop, is the central horror of her power. That places her at the top of this list. The most powerful Avenger by output. The most powerful Avenger by category of power. The most powerful Avenger by the gap she leaves between herself and the next entry. And the most powerful Avenger by the standard the show has been carefully constructing across the entire franchise, which is that power on this scale is never separable from the person who carries it, and the person who carries it always has to choose, eventually, what to do with it. Before the video closes on the final reflection, it should also acknowledge the entries this ranking has not addressed in the main sequence, because a ranking that calls itself complete and then omits the characters that almost made the list will, in the end, feel less honest than it should be. There are several Avengers whose status as Avengers is real, but whose tenure on the team was brief enough or contested enough that placing them inside the main hierarchy would have distorted the flow. They deserve a section of their own. The first is Pietro Maximoff, Quicksilver, Wanda's twin brother, who is introduced in Avengers Age of Ultron alongside her, and who dies in the same film. His power, granted by the same Hydra experiments with the Mind Stone scepter that gave Wanda her own latent powers their first expression, is superhuman speed. The films do not give a fixed maximum velocity for him, but his on-screen demonstrations include outrunning Hawkeye's arrows, evading Ultron's drones, and clearing battlefield distances in fractions of a second. He moves at speeds the camera has to slow time around in order to render him at all. His combat applications are essentially limited to mobility and to the ability to extract teammates from positions they cannot otherwise escape, which is what he is doing in the final act of Age of Ultron, when he shields Hawkeye and a Sokovian child from incoming fire from one of Ultron's combat drones, taking the rounds in his own body and dying on the floor of the floating city moments later. The line he says before he dies, looking up at Hawkeye, is famous and stays close to the version of his character that the film has presented. He was on the team for one mission. He died on his first day. The placement on the ranking, if he had to be placed, would be somewhere in the middle, comparable to Spider-Man in raw output but lower in versatility because his power set is single category. The film treats his death with the kind of brief, brutal acknowledgement that a soldier killed early in a war receives in a serious war film. The team moves on. Wanda absorbs the loss into the rest of the grief she will spend years processing. The second is Nick Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the founding architect of the Avengers Initiative. He is, in technical terms, never an Avenger himself. He is the executive who assembled the team. But his role in the franchise, from his post-credits appearance at the end of Iron Man in 2008 onward, is so central to the structure of the team that omitting him from a ranking would be a kind of dishonesty about how the team exists at all. His power, if power is the right word for it, is institutional. He is the spy who knows where everyone is. He is the operative who recovered Captain America from the ice and the man who, in Captain America the Winter Soldier in 2014, discovers that Hydra has infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. from the inside and is the one who survives, just barely, the attempt on his life that follows. He carries weapons. He runs operations. He has, in Secret Invasion released in June of 2023, a kind of weary capability that the show treats as the residue of having spent decades managing crises that other people are not aware exist. He does not have a power set in the strict sense. He has competence, judgment, and the willingness to make decisions he will not always be thanked for. He is, in the cosmology of the team, the foundation. The ranking is not built to include him because he is not in it, but the ranking would not exist without him. The third is Loki, whose status as an Avenger depends on which version of him you are talking about. The original Loki, the brother of Thor, is introduced in Thor in 2011 as the antagonist of that film, and his arc across the Avengers in 2012, Thor: The Dark World in 2013, Thor: Ragnarok in 2017, and Avengers: Infinity War in 2018, takes him through a gradual transition from villain to ambiguous figure, to in his final scene in Infinity War, a man who dies attempting to defend his brother by attacking Thanos with a small knife that does not work. His power set, magical and otherwise, is substantial. He is an Asgardian by upbringing, which gives him strength and durability comparable to lesser Asgardians, although below Thor's. He is also, the film's reveal in Thor in 2011, a frost giant by birth, taken as an infant by Odin from the battlefield, where Odin had defeated the frost giants in war. His magical training is in illusion, projection, telepathy, and shapeshifting. He can create copies of himself convincing enough to deceive other Asgardians. He can change his appearance. He can teleport short distances. His combat output is, in a straight fight, comparable to a sorcerer of Doctor Strange's tier, but in a different category. His ranking placement, if forced, would be somewhere in the upper middle, well above the unenhanced humans, comparable to the entries in the magic user range, but with the qualification that his power has always been used in service of his own purposes, rather than the team's, which makes the question of his Avenger status more complicated than the question of his strength. The variant Loki who appears in the Loki Disney Plus series, released in June of 2021, is a different character with the same starting capabilities and a different trajectory. He is recruited by the Time Variance Authority, an organization that exists outside of normal time and is tasked with policing the timeline. And across 2 seasons of the show, he becomes a being whose power scales beyond anything his original franchise self ever demonstrated. By the final episode of the 2nd season, released in November of 2023, he is sitting alone at the end of time, manually holding the multiverse together through an act of sustained will that the show stages as his elevation to a kind of cosmic axis. The series does not insist that you call him an Avenger. It does insist that you understand what his power, in the version of him that lived long enough to develop it, eventually became. If the ranking were extended to include him in his post-Loki series form, the placement would be near the top of the list, alongside or possibly above Doctor Strange, depending on how you read the implications of what he is doing at the end of time. The fact that he is not normally counted is a function of his complicated affiliation rather than of his capability. The fourth is the broader group of allies who have fought alongside the team but whose Avenger membership has always been situational rather than formal. The Guardians of the Galaxy, introduced in Guardians of the Galaxy in August of 2014, are technically not Avengers in the strict sense, although they fight alongside the team in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, and one of them, Peter Quill, has himself called the team Avengers in informal moments. The Eternals, introduced in Eternals in November of 2021, are a separate team with their own continuity and only intersect the Avengers indirectly. Shang-Chi, introduced in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings in September of 2021, has a power level that would place him near the top of this list if the Ten Rings themselves are counted as part of his arsenal, but his affiliation with the Avengers proper is still being built out. Moon Knight, the Hulk's cousin She-Hulk, and the new generation of young Avengers including Kate Bishop, America Chavez, Miss Marvel, Cassie Lang, and the new Patriot Eli Bradley, all sit in a tier of characters whose Avengers credentials are in the process of being established rather than already settled. A ranking that tried to fit them all in would either need to be 3 times as long or would need to compress them into categories that did not give them their due. The point of acknowledging these absences is not to apologize for them. The point is to acknowledge that the ranking is, in the strict sense, a snapshot. The team is alive. The roster is changing. The characters who define what an Avenger is in 2023 are different from the characters who defined it in 2012. The 7 original heroes who stood on the platform at the end of the Avengers in the famous low-angle shot, Stark, Rogers, Thor, Banner, Romanoff, Barton, and the support of Fury behind them, are mostly gone now. Stark and Romanoff are dead. Rogers is in retirement in the past. Banner is injured and rebuilding. Thor is off-planet. Barton has retired. Fury is older and operating out of a space station. The team that has replaced them is younger, more diverse, and more dispersed. The next ranking, in 5 years or 10, will be a different list. The fact that this list is the one that fits the current moment is not an accident. It is the show telling you that what the Avengers are is not fixed. It is, by its nature, always in transition. And so, the line on the battlefield at the end of Endgame, the line the video opened with, looks different once you put each member of it in the right place on the ranking. The man with the bow on one end, the Scarlet Witch on the other end, walking past the rest of them on her way to crush Thanos in midair. In between, the soldiers and the gods, the engineers and the spies, the children and the sorcerers, the man whose suit holds a piece of cosmic technology that powers his heart, the woman whose body absorbed a piece of the Tesseract and remade her into something the universe will spend the rest of its history trying to plan around. The word Avenger has, by this point, stopped being a category of power. It is a category of choice. Each of these people, at some point, decided that whatever they had, however small or however cosmically enormous, was going to be aimed at the same target as the others. That is what the line means. The ranking is the inventory. The choice is the team. The two things are not the same thing, and the entire architecture of the franchise has been telling you that, gently and patiently, since the first time the original 6 stood in that circle in the rubble of Grand Central in 2012, and realized, separately and together, that whatever they had been before this moment, they were now something the world had not yet invented a word for. There is a moment in the final scene of Avengers Endgame, after the battle is over, and Tony has been buried and Steve has been left on the bench by the lake. The remaining team is dispersed. Some have returned to their families, some have gone back to their kingdoms. Some, like Bucky, are still trying to work out what the rest of their lives are supposed to look like, now that the work that defined them has, at least temporarily, ended. The compound is in ruins. The world is rebuilding, and the team itself, the Avengers as they were assembled across the original 6 films, is over. The show does not present the ending as a triumph. It presents it as a closing. The most powerful beings on Earth, gathered for over a decade to defend a planet that did not always know what to do with them, have, in the end, succeeded at the cost of the 2 people who built the team in the first place. Tony, who designed the suits and the accords and the entire technological architecture, is dead. Steve, who was the moral standard and the unifying presence, has chosen to live a smaller life with someone he loved before any of it began. What is left is a team in transition, still defending the world, but now with new faces and new leadership, and new questions about what the next phase will look like. What the ranking does, in the end, is make a different kind of observation. The most powerful beings on this list were not the ones who held the team together. The team was held together by the ones in the middle and at the bottom. The man with the bow, the spy with the gadgets, the soldier in the suit, the veteran with the wings, the pilot in the armor, the man who came back from being a weapon, the king with the heart-shaped herb, the child in the spider suit. Without them, the gods and the sorcerers and the cosmic energy projectors would have had nothing to defend and no reason to act in concert. The ranking is a ranking of power. The team was an arrangement of trust. Consider for a moment what the ranking would look like if it were rebuilt from a different starting question. If, instead of asking who can deliver the most force, the question were who is the most necessary, the answer would not look anything like the ranking just walked through. The most necessary Avenger, by the cumulative measurement of who could not be removed from the franchise without the rest of the films collapsing, is almost certainly Steve Rogers, whose absence from the original team would mean that the team itself never coheres. He is the moral center that makes the rest of the personalities, who would otherwise be incompatible, fit together. The second most necessary is probably Tony Stark, whose technology and resources are the literal infrastructure the team operates on. The third is Nick Fury, who recruited each of them in turn and who held the loose collection of contracts and favors together long enough for the team to become a team. Necessity, in this measurement, is almost the inverse of power. The strongest beings on the team are, in many ways, the most replaceable, because their function on the team is the function of force, and force can be substituted across roles. The weakest beings on the team are the irreplaceable ones, because their function is connective, and connection cannot be substituted. That observation is the show being quietly subversive about its own genre. Most superhero stories present the most powerful character as the most important. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, in the way it has actually constructed its team, has consistently presented the most powerful character as the one whose use is, in most situations, constrained by either circumstance or by character. Wanda is restrained by her grief and her self-awareness. Vision is restrained by his philosophical inclinations. Captain Marvel is restrained by her commitments elsewhere in the galaxy. Doctor Strange is restrained by his obligations to the universe's larger magical balance. The team's heavy hitters do not, in the daily operation of the team, do most of the work. The work is done by the people at the middle and the bottom of this list. The work is the patrol routes, the surveillance, the rescue operations, the relationships with allies, the maintenance of the team's standing with governments and with civilians. The heavy hitters are reserved for the events that the rest of the team cannot handle. And by definition, those events are rare. That is the architecture the films have built. It is also, in a way the films do not need to underline, a fairly accurate model of how organizations actually work. The most capable people in any organization are often the ones who are deployed least often, because their deployment is expensive and because the situations that justify it are the ones nobody wants to occur. The competent middle, the people who can handle most of what comes up without needing to call in the heaviest available resource, are the ones who actually run the operation day to day. The ranking reflects power. The functioning reflects something else entirely. There is, in the closing reflection of any honest look at this team, the question of what it means to belong to it. The bar for being an Avenger, across the films, has never been a strict power threshold. Hawkeye is an Avenger. So is Doctor Strange. The two of them are separated, in raw output, by a margin so large that the comparison is almost meaningless. What unites them, what makes both of them members of the same team, is something the franchise has spent 15 years carefully not defining out loud. It is something like the willingness to be deployed against threats that the rest of the world cannot handle, combined with the willingness to put yourself in a line of people whose powers are different from your own, and trust that the arrangement will hold. That is, in the end, the only definition the show has ever offered. The line itself, then, is the answer to a question the films keep posing without quite saying it. The question is, what does it mean to be powerful? The answer is not the entry at the top of this list. The answer is the line, the arrangement, the agreement between beings who could, in many cases, destroy each other, to instead point their abilities outward in the same direction. The line on the battlefield, looked at from this angle, is not a hierarchy, it is a roster. The fact that some entries on the list could, in a direct confrontation, dismantle the others is, in the end, beside the point. The point is that none of them did. The point is that they stood there, on the rubble, in front of the man who had killed half of all life, and they walked forward together. The ranking exists to put their powers in order. The standing forward, in the end, is what they chose to do with the powers they had. That is the whole story. That, in the end, is what the line on the battlefield was always meant to show you. Not a hierarchy of power, a roster of people who, having looked at what